Okay, hello there. Deficio here, formerly the support player of Copenhagen Wolves, maybe Ninja and Pyjamas, you may remember. From the same country as Frogen, Jesus, Denmark. In my country, we have a lot of players who are kind of obsessed with like a tactic approach, some very good, very warding, but we're not so good. We don't have so many good junglers, very good junglers. People like Jankos. The thing is, they play the game too much. I think you got to, because when you play the game, it's about how you play the game. It's not what you do in the game; it's how you play the game. So you got to aim to contest the Drake. You got to trade with the enemy. You got to bait him in there. You got to, because you can easily get him to the Drake. If you can get him there, then that's the situation where the AD carry comes in. He gets his damage. Yeah, obviously it's not deficient. It's actually another one of my patented accents. Possibly offensive to everyone from that country. I don't know how that works. Thorin here. I work for On Gamers, which is a site that has no problems whatsoever, has unlimited resources, and a very bright future in front of it. So my co-host here on this two-man show. You might know him as the former coach of CLG. I prefer to think of him as someone who I've been reliably informed, actually wrote like an affidavit, like witnessed that Janna will never be a viable support, that it has no place in this game, it has nothing of value, it could never be used in any sort of team comp, and it doesn't synergize well with champions, right, Monty? That's about right, isn't it, Monte Cristo?
That's what I'm told, I believe, yes.
But it was worth it, Monty, because it spawned one of the all-time great gifs. I think everything in life, that famous thing, Monty, that you should sort of live for the stories. You want like a good story. On the internet, we just live for a good gif, right? That's all you really want. You just want a good gif file to come out of it.
That's right. It's my immortality in digital form, I guess. It's that and the Korean hype train conductor. I spend hundreds and thousands of hours doing analysis for League of Legends, but really I just want to be remembered for my one-liners.
Oh, no, Monty, I can feel you because we do this show. And what's funny is every time I go back and I have to do that fucking lengthy process of like doing the timestamps, when I'm watching the show and I'm clicking around, it's all just people laughing, having a good time, like good jokes that I just throw away jokes, actual lots of just like in-depth discussion, like someone talking for 10 minutes at a time about this topic. But apparently the whole show is just like, this person's shit and I hate them and they're all just trash. Like, that's what I'm told the shows actually. But I keep looking, I can't find those. They're like last for 30 seconds and then, I don't know, it's just what they remember you for, Monty, I think. It's just sometimes they remember you for something weird.
It's okay. Well, hopefully this world, I'll be remembered for my Samsung Galaxy bandwagoning. That's right. Blue, white, doesn't matter. Same jersey,
That's the worst right there, Monty. It's one thing if you bandwagon, but you've become like a fucking Najin fan now, where they're like, oh, I'm a huge fan of S.H.I.E.L.D. Like, really, were you? Is that why you became a Najin fan? It's not because of Macnoon and Sword, was it? And then they even betrayed Macnoon, dude. They were just like, no, I'm fine with Macnoon leaving. Like, what? That was the whole team. Like, are you kidding me? Just, it's like the stages of bandwagonism. You just got to identify if they could win. And then like, should I leap from this bandwagon to this one? Which should I go with? But
it's all right. I'm forever on the sorrow of the KT bandwagon. That's the #1 bandwagon for me.
What I like though, Monty, is that I even noticed during all the broadcasts, you would specifically try, if people asked you who would win, you would even though you would say white if pressed, you would try to just say, I think Samsung's going to win. You wouldn't even say the team, dude. Like we don't even use the team normally. We normally just say like blue or white, but you just kept like, I think Samsung's got this one pretty much. Like, you're right. You've got like a 90% chance when you say that. But I was like, okay, hedging their bets. Okay.
That's what you got to do, man. You got to hedge. But no, I do think white's going to win.
Okay. So, obviously, we're going to have to talk about the World Championship in this discussion. Now, but actually, I'll tell you what we'll start with. We're obviously going to talk about specific games and some of the interesting things that happened. But Spellsy just put out a stats piece today, which is quite interesting just because we can look at this sort of in the way I do my Thorin series things. All you really do is just look at a stat and you see, does it fit into what you already... What I try to do is I don't try to just like figure the entire theory based on the stat. I try to look at the stat and go, okay, does that correlate with something that I already had a preconception of about the team? So when you look at these stats here, one of the most interesting ones is it shows the gold distribution of each of the 5 players on the teams, but relative to the role. And that's the key part, relative to the role. So that'll mean like in the group, I think. And so when you see some of these,
are you sure about that? I think this is relative to the average that he's collected over time. I think he's compiled stats for
to the previous
over time about what the average amount of gold
he's comparing it to NLCS
jungler should get.
Yeah. Okay. right? But anyway, the point is, for some of these, it tells an interesting story, both in what it says and what it doesn't. Like that famous thing about how there's a famous quote that's pretty good about stats where it says something like stats is like a bikini. You know, what it suggests is revealing, but what it conceals is vital. No, that's a great quote to think about when you look at its stats, because it's exactly what it is. You should look at what it's suggesting, but you should also bear in mind what isn't being suggested, because really, that's what we're all most interested in. And that is pretty much the point of a bikini. So there we go. There's my breakdown of a bikini right there, Monty. Now let's talk about some League of Legends.
Thank you for that crucial analysis of women's wear.
So the first interesting one, Monty, is obviously when you go to Samsung White. Now listen, in Samsung White, they have a phenomenal team of players. Like, listen, Imp was balling out of control here. But you look at this graph and you're just like, that Dandy guy's pretty good compared to an average juggler. I mean, he's only maxed the fucking graph out of where the gold could go to. Like, at this point, if like he gets another piece of gold in the game, I think the game just like freezes. And then like a kill screen comes up and it says like you have won the game of League of Legends. And then all the league points in the world just draw to him. Sort of like how when that guy in Highlander killed that final guy and all that energy went into him and he's like, I'm God. That's what will happen to Dandy at this point. Like, can't dominate any more than this.
What do you think? His eyes will just start growing and glowing and like crackling with electricity while he's staring at his monitor.
Yeah, I actually want to see that, by the way, Monty. You know, when you win the World Championship, you get a skin of your model. I think we should actually have a skin that is a Lee Sin skin, but it's actually Dandy, because Dandy is Lee Sin, remember. It should be along these lines, Monty. It should be possessed ultimate final form Dandy Lee Sin skin. That's the one I want, with glowing red eyes. And it should obviously just by default come with like a Mejai's Soul Stealer or something, because that's all you do all game is just collect people's souls hovering around the map.
He'll just be covered in the blood of TSM.
Well, we'll get to that later, but yeah. Good, don't come on. That's that you spoiled the surprise of my favorite part of the show there, Monty. So obviously, that's an easy one to point out there on this graph. Yeah, everyone's good, but man alive, like the amount of gold going to the jungler there compared to what an average is for a team is out of this world. So let's talk about that. What did you think of Dandy's performance in this group?
Fantastic. I mean, his kill contribution was crazy. If you look at some of the most dominating games that they would have, he was close to 100% kill contribution, which is why there are several reasons why Samsung White's gold total is so high, because on the jungle and support positions, they're way above the average. Part of that is global gold, but part of it is also just how well Dandy and Mata group with the rest of the team and how large a percentage of kills they contribute to and kills they set up. So pretty impressive stuff from Dandy, especially considering we haven't seen his Rengar yet. And that's the champion that he probably gets the most gold on, just because he's so aggressive and he's so kill heavy on that jungler.
That's something that needs to be said, actually, Monty. So people might not like this idea, but I'm going to actually reference it later for the EDG part as well. But I'm actually pretty sure Samsung didn't attempt to show anything from their hand in this group stage.
No,
I think they just played. It's not like they went the other way, Monty, and picked fucking Teemo into jungle or something. Like they played champions that you should play, but they never tried to show their absolute strengths. Like
except for Katarina.
Like they definitely could have picked Rengar in some of these games, but instead, I mean, there was one game where Dandy picked fucking Jarvan as if to be like, all right, Chinese junglers, I'll show you how it's done as well. You'll all get your turn. Everyone line up. He's probably like, listen, Shook, I've got my Riven for you later on, but that's going to be in the playoffs, son. Like, it's like they don't want to show all their hand, right?
No, they didn't at all. And that's what's so interesting about this, too. Like we were talking about, they didn't show the Rengar, which is definitely one of Samsung White's strongest picks. We didn't see Pawn's Jace, which is one of his strongest picks. We didn't see, what else didn't we see? Just take a look right now. We saw pretty much everything from Imp, I would assume.
Playing a lot of his like assassin playmaker things that he might not necessarily play once we get.
He's probably not going to play those, because if we notice, he played like 5 assassins pretty much. He played Fizz, Cat, Talon, Yasuo, and Zed, and only 1 game of Zillion. But he's much more known for playing more utility mid laners, so that was a bit interesting. I think he's just showing off, honestly.
No Mundo from Looper.
Yeah, no Mundo from
In general,
Looper.
a lot of the signature champions you didn't really see actually that much. Like if anything, you only saw them when like for example, Imp won't play Vayne that much probably in the playoffs. I think he just played it just to style on people because it's in the groups and he likes a champion, So, but yeah, not that many signature champions actually. I think Mata was the only one because it's support where he played him.
Also, you'll notice one through line throughout the group stage that was very interesting was how few lane swaps there were comparatively. It was like when the good teams would pick like that stupid Jana Vane lane that was terrible, they wouldn't lane swap. But I promise you, in a real game where they actually were respected their opponents, they would lane swap in that situation. But a lot of the dominant teams would just head straight into 2v2s and 1v1s because they were so confident in their ability to win that they didn't want to show any lane swap strategies or anything like that.
Here's the thing, though. I have like a clarification to make on this point, Monty, just for like general education. Maybe people have never heard this before, but it's actually a famous sort of almost a meme, like a mental virus of an idea within games like Counter-Strike. There was once an excuse people used to make, which is that, say, a world championship level team lost in the group stage. Sometimes people would say, their fans, like, oh, they're just saving all their strategies. You know, they didn't show their strategies because they want to use them later in the round. And they made it out anyway. Yeah, they got upset, but they lost. You know, it doesn't really count. Most of the time, actually, in those scenarios, that wasn't true, actually. That was just fans rationalizing them losing, okay. But it's actually true, particularly in Korean esports, that there is truth to this. Because first of all, their system inherently favors. If you have a look at how Korean esports tournaments have set up, so GSL in StarCraft 2 and Champions in OGN, even for individual group stage games, like, you know in advance who you're going to play. It's not like one of those old school Western tournaments where you arrive and you know your group, but then you have no clue who you'll play in the round of 8 and then the semi-final and all that. So the difference is, in the West, it's more about you have a few strategies now and you just use them all during the tournament, and hopefully you have enough and they get you to the final and they all work and you win. But a lot of it, that's why it's possible to have more upsets at a foreign tournament, because it's a shorter span of time and you have this more random element. But the reason why it's almost impossible to win Seasons of Champions unless you're really good is because every bracket stage you have like a week and both sides are preparing totally for each other. And so along those lines, I have actually heard stories where I did an interview with a StarCraft 2 player once, MMA, this famous guy who's a Terran player, he's won lots of titles. And he even told me something which I then referenced to other players, and they told me similar things, that if they were playing a foreign tournament, for example, and they were playing a team a guy they'd never played, so someone that was not a Korean and they don't really know him, rather than like scout him or waste any time doing that, all they would do is just play their strongest standard default game that was like safe, not too aggressive, just in the middle somewhere. It's going to have a nice clean feel to it. Just play that out. And they even said, like, even if I lose a game or two, like, I'm going to get out the group stage. Then once I get to face the real opponents that I know and I have to use everything against, that's when I'll like bring out the big guns, you know. That is when I'll be 100% focused in. So that's why I brought it up, because I actually do think that in this group in particular, you can definitely make a case that these two teams, White and EDG, at least before the game started, had no reason to believe they could lose to these teams. To them, just playing a default style should be enough to get them out of this group. So as a result, why give away something to like Royal Club or whoever you're going to play in the next round, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And if we think about it from the Korean team's perspective too, now we have to consider the World Championship as effectively a Season of Champions in OGN, right? It's nearly the same format. Nearly. The only difference is, okay, Champions, 4 groups of 4. Double round robin. Except in Champions, they play the games back-to-back against the same team instead of like playing them, and it's a point-based system, 2-0 for the 3 points, 1-1 for 1 point, right? It's a point-based system, not just like a win-loss system, right? That is literally the only difference. Top 2 teams go into single elimination quarterfinals, best of 5, semifinals, finals, right? So effectively, this is a Season of Champions. But to validate what you're saying, in a Season of Champions, the 24 games that are played in each group, right? They take place over, 4 weeks? Instead of being condensed, like you have 6 games. Yeah. Well, no, wait, that's not true at all. Haha, just kidding. So we have 4 games a day. So yeah, they would take place over 2 weeks effectively, except it's interspersed with all the 4 groups. So 4 weeks in total. But you always have, before your next best of 2, usually you have like a week or more to prepare. Very rarely you'll have 2 matches in the same week, but you still have 4 or 5 days. Whereas you're jamming everything straight in these 2 groups into 4 days right here. So there's not enough time to adequately prepare for each individual opponent, which means that, from what I can tell from looking at the compositions, they were just defaulting to safe picks while still holding some of their most powerful picks like close to the vest.
I mean, that's one of the reasons, this discussion, we've had it on the show before about certain teams, where something people always like to play out is like, what would happen? Okay, say Alliance wins Europe. You want to know, like, well, how far would they make in a season of champions? We've all heard this question before, or it used to be Cloud9 would be the one people would use. Part of the reason why I understand why you've said stuff like they'd never make it past the round of 8, or some of them wouldn't even make the playoffs or whatever. That sounds so extreme to a Western fan who's just seen his team doing awesome. But that's actually another factor as to why I actually think there's credence to that idea. Like the reason why a team probably wouldn't make the semis in champions isn't even just the skill disparity. Like actually some of those teams we're talking about, some of them can match up in skill. Their problem is that they don't use that style there where this other team has a week to scrim and mimic your style and figure out exactly what they're going to do. And we've seen in champions over and over again, this is how teams win the championship. You can win just by being super awesome. Like Blue, to some degree, had their style totally nailed and they were the masters of that style. But obviously, in examples like Ozone winning that time, you can see this is where the week has had its effect, You can tell that the team that played in the semifinals isn't the team that just won the final, right?
Well, yeah, absolutely. And usually you have 2 weeks to prepare for the finals. So it makes the finals pretty darn interesting. Now here, hopefully this will transition over to the West, because if the proposed changes to the LCS go through next season, then we will see something similar where you have like a week before all the playoff matches. So hopefully we can see more of that kind of adaptation.
Okay, so before we go on, another stat from this chart that I thought I'd bring up was... actually, not a stat particularly, but I thought I'd just mention that when I was looking at the ward distribution, and Mata has almost 50% of the wards. Like, in that game against EDG, Monty, the game itself was such a dominating performance and so impressive, and people maybe they got caught up with Imp doing go to crazy and all that. But actually, that performance was just like, if you're an aficionado of League of Legends, that was just like a Mata performance. That was just like a masterpiece of like control everything, the lane, the fights, like just dominating the whole game in every respect, right? I mean, didn't he play something retarded like 98 wards or something?
89 or something like that.
But I think there was like 14 pinks as well or something stupid,
19.
Okay.
19. 19 pink wards. It's ridiculous. Not only that, but the team placed 148 wards or something like that. So, I mean, that was the first game against EDG. And it was super, super impressive, obviously. I mean, there's really not anything that's comparable to that number of wards. And so that's what's so funny is, like, in this chart, we see percentage of total wards placed, but the actual number of wards placed is way higher for White than it is for any of the other teams.
Here's what's funny, Monty. I've actually always been a bit annoyed with esports fans because they're naive about practice time, okay? And I've made this case before. Okay, when a fan hears that a Korean player practices 10 hours a day, then he naively will say, right, why doesn't Doublelift practice 10 hours a day? You know, that if he doesn't, then he's lazy and he's not as dedicated and he doesn't deserve to win. Like, here's the problem, guys. When you play a game, let's say you play for 3 hours, okay? You play League for 3 hours. First of all, you're not practicing League. You're playing League. It's fun. It's a fun game. You can fuck around for an hour of that. In theory, this practice is like intense, focus, single-minded. I've got an objective in mind. I'm trying to improve one thing. That in itself is way more draining than your 3 hours playing League, 3 hours practicing. Now, imagine I asked you for fun to play for 10 hours in a day. Sure, some people can do it when they're really into the game, but even so, 10 hours is a lot to just play for fun. Now imagine you have to practice 10 hours every day. In theory, everyone could practice an hour, but doing 10, now it doesn't just become doing it. It's like stamina to even mentally be able to get over that. Here's the thing in StarCraft, right? There was a player, Snoot, who's one of the top foreigners, and he actually tried this. He got a whole summer of his life, right, where he wanted to improve. And he said to himself, you know what? I'm going to go for the max. I've heard that the most anyone plays in Korea when they go crazy on practice is 50 games a day. And obviously, in theory, 50 games could last 50 hours. They're not really going to, some of them are going to be like all-ins and stuff. And so he forced himself to play 50. So even if he got to 47 and he was destroyed and everything, he just kept playing. And he said that when you play that many games in a day in practice mode, you literally almost lose your mental faculties. Like your mind becomes skewed because you've played so many games in a day, and the mental strain of playing the next one and trying to, because remember, you're trying to take what you took before and add it on and improve and all this. So the point I'm making here, right, is anyone can go to the fountain and purchase wards. I've done it loads of times. But what's funny is none of us in a game have probably ever placed 19 pink wards. I don't think I've ever even bought that many. This is a fucking professional game, and the guy did it while dominating the whole game. Like that, it sounds like something easy. Who everyone can purchase award, place award, but actually, it as weird as it sounds, you can't do that. You can't do that, guys. It's not. You can't do it. It's impossible.
Yeah, and I mean, just to put this in a personal context for me, when I was competitive in Warcraft 3 and 10 years ago, and I was practicing a lot and watching a ridiculous number of like Moon's replays and every day I'd go and watch a bunch of replays and practice very seriously and try and get better. I mean, it got to the point where I was playing so much Warcraft 3 that I was actually starting to dream about Warcraft 3, and I would start to dream about builds and like micro, and like it took over my brain. I couldn't think about anything else.
Luckily, though, Monty, you realized that, like, wow, this is like a problem I have. It's sort of like an obsession. Like, I shouldn't nurture that. And so what happened was you managed to transition away from esports and you got a regular job. And you balanced your life out. You got it so that, when work ended, Monty. And then you went off and you did something totally different. And it all worked out, right?
I totally wasn't trying to cast more games than any other caster in League of Legends while simultaneously coaching a professional team. Yeah, I totally wasn't trying to do that.
Yeah. No, it's like that. There's actually a scene in the movie The Prestige that I like where Tesla says to someone, he says like, like obsessions are a dangerous thing. They can consume you entirely. The problem is if it's a fun obsession, you want it to consume you. You're like, yeah, bring it on. I will become League of Legends. That's what I will do. Speaking of which, we have a weekly 3-hour League of Legends talk show to continue. So on that note about obsessions taking over your life, possibly ruining it, another thing to talk about in this group. Okay, before we leave the Samsung topic, we should probably discuss that last game against EDG, Monty, because I made this comment on Twitter. That might be the most dominant single game in the history of like international competition. Just in the sense of like every aspect of it was like you dominate here, harder. I mean, that was ridiculous, right?
Yeah, it was. I mean, I wouldn't maybe put it as like the most dominant game ever, but it was pretty
Amongst
tight.
Two elite level considered teams, I can't think of any that have been more crazy than that.
I mean, you get some stomps, like even in a best of 5, like sometimes in a final, you'll get, one team will get a 25-minute win and it'll be really dominant for that one game. So I don't know if it's that bad, but it was pretty bad.
I mean, the ones that came to my mind was obviously some of the Royal Club games in the final last year were ridiculous. Like they just got their heads caved in. The one that was another obvious like one to bring up because it was Chinese team again was the famous second OMG meeting in the group where I think you called it like the best team sequence in history or something, where they took the 6 kills, the 3 towers, the inhibitor, and they just
at 13 minutes. Yeah, it was ridiculous.
So I mean, there is a precedent for some insane games, but that has to be up there. That was just like styling in every possible sense.
Yeah, it was pretty bad. I mean, EDG really didn't show up to play either. It was kind of surprising. Name was a lot worse than he typically is. I'm not really sure what's going on there. There's some people saying he was sick in Taiwan or that EDG didn't care, or they were sandbagging. I don't really know, but they looked pretty bad.
Okay, we'll get to that. So the thing with that sort of performances, though, that was just like classic White also, because it's like I said, when people say the weakness, where if they're ahead and then they do an aggressive move and they lose, they're like, oh, too aggressive, they were too cocky. Like, no, but there's another side to that coin where they're ahead and they do that and it works, and then they do another thing that's even worse and that works, and they tower dive you and kill everyone before that, and you're like, okay, so we can't even fight under our own Nexus towers now with all the members. Like, how do you win this game? Like, that's why it's intimidating, right? To really, if it works, that's an awesome style to just destroy someone mentally.
Yeah, it was pretty impressive. It really was. I'm very interested to see how that goes moving forward, because this White looks really dominant. I mean, this is just a continuation of the story, though. No Korean team has yet to lose to a non-Korean team this year.
I mean, here's
not even a single game.
This stat actually checks out 100% as well. Since Samsung White got their lineup together with Mata, and obviously they used to have Dade for 3 seasons last year, but when they had this lineup where 3 of the 5 are the same, they had Dandy, they had Mata, they had Imp, and we all know it was made, and they won that first season, spring. Since that season, they have only ever lost in best of 5 to SK Telecom and Samsung Blue, who are probably now, accomplishment-wise, the 2 best teams in the history of Korean League of Legends and the two dominant teams. They've only lost to the dominant because remember they always go to the semis. Well, in most seasons, and if they lose there, they always win They always win the third place games. The famous thing. So historically, the level of this team. That's why it's amazing that they flopped Worlds last year, dude. This is the team where on paper it should be impossible. You've got like that list I did last week where every fucking player's on the list, and like this should be the one team where it's impossible to flunk a tournament like that because your average level should be so high.
Yeah, it really was amazing last year, and we do talk about the fact that they've been top 3 in the last 5 seasons of champions. You know, they've either won the finals, they've only done it once, surprisingly, and they've been third 3 times, and then made the final once. But yeah,
Twice.
they've got second place once.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, second place once. Yeah, okay.
So it's it's really quite incredible their consistency, despite the fact that they've only been able to pull out the actual win. They've been top 3 5 times out of the last 5 seasons, but only been first once. That's a little weird.
That's interesting though, because that's where you can point to a weakness. Because you can't look at the players and point to a weakness. Because it's like if they play the way they can, they will win. That's why I say it doesn't make sense every time they beat Blue. But that's where you can look at a weakness. Like for example, if in sports you've made like 4 Grand Slam finals, but you only won 1 of them. Odds are it wasn't your opponent just being better than you every time. You've got there more than anyone else did. So there's probably a reason in you that maybe causes it. Like maybe you break down in a certain point of a game, or maybe you have to lead at a certain point, and if you're too far behind, you don't have the mental fortitude to come back. That's usually what those sorts of things point to. So that is interesting going forwards, because it does mean it's not like Samsung White are unbeatable. Well, we just said they lose every season except 1. But the problem is, also, within that same fact, Monty, remember, they lose every season but 1 to the greatest teams of all time in their absolute prime, with their star players going absolutely the best League of Legends we've ever seen. So, caveat there, Western teams, if you can do, step 1, step 3, question, profit, you have to be able to get to that step 3. That's the hard part right there. It's not quite as easy as just knowing they have a weakness.
Well, also, I mean, the White's flaws we saw in the first game versus EDG, where they get a big lead and then they start kind of trolling around. Like, I have no idea what the fuck Pon was doing in that game. He just kept walking into bottom lane and like autoing a turret as Zillion and then getting killed. Like, it's just stupid the way they play sometimes when they have a lead. I think they get cocky and then they just don't close out the games properly.
So, okay, let's spiral from the Samsung White thing into EDG, because they were really the only... I thought these were going to be the only teams we'd be talking about in this group, but obviously we will address AHQ later. In the first game, when Samsung White played against EDG, it was weird, because even though EDG got their heads kicked in, it was like you could actually find positive things to say. Like, I remember watching the game and being like, here's the funny thing. I watched the game and took sort of hope from it, actually, because I watched it and I was like, actually, the way those late game team fights were going, considering how behind EDG were, they had no right to even be in those fights. And so it just showed me, okay, the team fighting of Chinese teams is legit, as we've all seen in China. Like, it does translate, and that's always been a famous quality of theirs. And not only that, Name was able to output a shit ton of damage in those fights. So it's like, okay, yeah, you lost this game. This was out of control anyway. You couldn't have beaten this team now. But if you'd gotten this game to that point in the game, like 40 minutes, with similar, like not too far behind, now this might have been a winnable game.
And that's what was so impressive about Name in that game, was that Freak pulled up the stats afterwards, and he did more damage to champions than any other player in that game, despite the fact that he was well behind Imp in terms of... And yeah, Imp was trolling at the end too, right? He was just getting randomly blown up because he was doing dumb shit like rocket jumping into the enemy team for no reason. And then Pawn was just deciding not to ult him or whatever. I mean, definitely there was an element there of White not caring. But even so... the fact that he managed to come back out of a hole and get to that point where he was dealing that much damage in team fights that he eclipsed everybody else was pretty impressive.
Because I think that's going to lead into, obviously, I think to discuss EDG and the fact that they were a bit underwhelming, we have to discuss the Name issue, because, okay, here's something I'm going to address, actually, because you mentioned it in an interview recently, but it's something that I've always thought the same thing about, which is that when people use the word hype, Monty, they want things to be hyped up, etc. People have gotten confused about what the word means now. They think hype just means when something is awesome and you say it's really awesome and we all get excited. That's actually not hype. Hype is actually to artificially sort of create a fake fervor about something, usually to get someone excited. But the idea is usually it's like an expert is supposed to sort of disingenuously pretend something's awesome, so that guy isn't sure and doesn't know, thinks, right, well, I'll get excited as well. And then if it turns out to be good, then great. If it doesn't, then he got to get excited even though it was a loss. So they think it's like that. Whereas actually, in a weird way, my theory is I actually think hype's like a bit immoral. Because I think if the area you're in is really good, then actually, you not only do you not need to hype up things, because there'll be really good stuff in there that you can just focus on. Like, we just waxed lyrical about White owning completely here. We weren't hyping them at all. It really happened. Not only that, though, I think if you put in hype, sometimes it actually fucks with that. Because if we did that about White, and then we were like, wow, Dark Passage totally blew my mind, and I never thought they could lane that well and all that, that would like take away from what we did for White there, because the relative gap would just be closed too much. So when we talk now, I don't want to say there was hype around Name, because there definitely wasn't. If this is a guy who'd played one season and he's coming to this tournament and I'd have said, he's the best AD carry in the world, he's going to blow you all away, that would be hype, because there wouldn't be a basis to it. Even if Name shits the bed completely in this tournament, does a Dandy and a Mata from last year.
No, a Dade. Does a Dade.
Even if he was to do that, Monty, it wouldn't change the fact that he is going to go down as probably one of the best League of Legends players ever, because his body of work in China is that good. I mean, I made this point, okay, when they had that failure last year, Samsung White, okay, there hasn't been a World since then, Monty. White hasn't gone to a World Championship since then, yet we all consider Mata like one of the best support players ever. Dandy's one of the best junglers ever. Dade's a fucking amazing player because of their body of work in Korea. So I just want to make that point. Like, if Name turns out not to be good and he's underwhelming overall in the tournament, I will be one of the first to be like, wow, he wasn't as good as international competition. Does he have some sort of mental flaw? Is his team not prepared? I don't know what it could be. But I would never be like, he was overhyped. He's not that good. In fact, he's not even as good as Reckless, if Reckless had a good tournament, for example. You have to look at the totality of a guy's career. What do you think on this topic, though? Because, I mean, you had high expectations for him, right?
Of course, and just to go on the hype issue, that's why I've like stopped dealing with all the Korean hype train shit, because it's not a hype train. It's just the Korean dominance reality. It's just real. Like, that's the reality we live in. There's no hype. That's just it.
You got to get it catchy though, Monty. I think what you need to do there is, because the Korean hype train all fits together. So if you're going to use that line, it has to be something like it's the Korean dominance reality sorrow. I think that's the line right there.
Sorrow? I'm not sorry.
Oh, but everyone else is, Monty. Everyone else is like the fact that Koreans dominate causes sorrow. That's all it does, Monty.
All right. The KDRS. Korean dominance reality.
I think it's going to catch on. All the kids are going to be saying it in the playground. So no, but yeah. So what did you think of Name?
Just really underwhelming, especially in the HQ game when he was getting hooked and all this other stuff that wasn't usually his positioning in these fights. And it's not like he was getting hooked by a really good support either. Like, Green Team was pretty good, I guess. He was okay, but he wasn't like a Korean level Thresh player. You know what I mean? And he had some really bad positioning in a lot of those fights. They played kind of cocky. I'm not really sure what he was doing. Just very disappointing performance from him, and not what we've seen from him in China, like, at all.
Because the thing with is, I think that's like a good point to make, is getting caught in the AHQ games, because that was actually the biggest surprise to me. Because actually, one of this guy's strengths is when you watch him in fights, he's like one of those guys who's mastered like auto attack range and how to get in and out and do the damage. He doesn't just stand there and kill everyone. He like gets in, does his damage. He sees that someone's coming. He moves out of the way of that. And like his ability to sort of get that, which is obviously you can't just like calculate that. It's like an intuitive feeling thing in the game. But it was obviously massively off in that game, because the two catches where they had onto him were basically the game deciders.
Yeah, it was really, really bad. I mean, and we pointed out a lot of that, like FZZF not having a Mikhail's Crucible was pretty important. But frankly, he shouldn't have been in a position to get hooked in the first place. But his support should have had something for him, should he, so he didn't have to blow his QSS on that, or so he could save his QSS for the death mark from Zed. It was just a really weird game from EDG. The itemization was really off, and it was dumb.
I have a point to make on that, actually, believe it or not, which is that actually that's a problem that pros sometimes have, where they almost have a solo queue mentality. So if I'm super fed, Monty, I'm like 8-1-5 or something on a champion, and obviously I'm dominating the shit out of my lane opponent and now the game in general. Then once I get tons of really good items, the solo queue mentality is just get even more damage items. Now I'm going to kill them even harder. No, actually what's funny is a great thing that I noticed back in the day that Moscow 5 used to do was they were one of the best teams ever for adapting
by GAs.
Yeah, well, they knew what to do. They either bought the GA or the Banshee's Veil, depending on what type of opponent they were facing, just to be like, you know what, we're so far ahead and we're going to beat them anyway, but let's just like guarantee that, because now now you have to kill all of us twice in a fucking fight and we're already winning the team fights. Like, it's just a way of sort of, it's a way of hedging your bets so that you really can't lose, right?
Absolutely. If you're a full item up, it's almost always a better idea to go for a defensive item because say you're an AD carry, you're already going to be outputting as much damage as your opponent, but then you get more survivability, so you get more sustained damage over the course of the team fight. Sure, your burst might not be as high as it would be, but it's really hard to argue against that kind of just safer play.
Because one of the best examples, the reason I picked M5, is that that's actually one of the areas where Genja would do a different build to most other AD carries, but he actually did it better than most AD carries. Because the double lift school of thought, okay, would be, I'm super fed, I've got all these kills, we're winning, so I'm definitely going to now complete this last Whisper as my last item, okay? But actually, that's where Genja would be like, wait a minute, do I really need a slightly bit more damage? And I'm already killing them anyway, so I don't really need armor pen that much. Or I could get like a Guardian Angel here, and I'm definitely going to win the game because I'm going to output all my damage. Then if somehow I get caught, I'm going to win anyway. Whereas with the last Whisper, that doesn't help you when they collapse on you and you miss position and they kill you. Like you can't, you're not doing that damage anymore, you know. So it's an area where there is a debate to be had. It's not as like simple as like A/B follows C, right?
Right, and it does depend on the kind of comp you're running. If you're running a pick comp, it probably is better to go for that damage because you want to get as much burst damage as possible. But if you're trying to bait Baron or something like that or force a team fight, then it's probably better to have a defensive item in most scenarios.
Okay. So I have another itemization point for you, Monty. This was a discussion that Krepo brought up many times. I've got to say, on one hand, okay, I think Krepo might have over-egged the pudding. Like he made his description was very good and he explained it very well. But here's the thing, once you've explained it and it's like you've shown that it's a suboptimal build, you should probably just reference it. Like don't sort of explain the same thing again and again because since the players can't hear you, they're probably going to do the same thing they were doing in the last match. They're not going to hear you and be like, well, Krepo said not to, right? Okay, I don't want him saying that. Like, so you're just going to end up saying it like 4 times. So the problem with the Krepo thing I want to bring up now is it was at least because I realized, listen, I've done analysis desk myself. You have limited time and you don't always, like sometimes you say things in the wrong order or you say a point that you think are taken like a given, that they know what I mean there, but maybe actually someone takes something slightly different from it. So an example of this would be, when I first heard Krepo say that, it sounded to me like he was sort of mocking it in a way, like this is just suboptimal and why would you ever do that? And so it made it sound like in every scenario it was a mistake to ever complete the Frost Queen's claim instead of going like the other way you do it is you either go to the finished Frost Queen's claim, which actually is quite rare, only Koreans seem to do it, or you go to the Mikhail's as the second item because you just get the Frost Fang, then you go Mikhail's second item, then you might even go for a third item before the Frost Queen. You might go for like Randuin's or Locket or something like that, depending on what sort of team you have. But obviously, we saw all the Korean supports nearly kept completing the Frost Queen's claim. So what Krepo did correctly is in games they lost, he would find a situation where, okay, actually in that moment, it would have been more beneficial if you'd have known to have the Mikhails there. Because, for example, if you in this game that EDG lost, if you could have put the Mikhails onto Name when he got hooked and then killed, he might have survived. You probably would have won those fights. That would have been the decider in itself. What do you think on this topic in general, like the support itemization? Do you have any thoughts?
I actually tend to agree with Krepo here. I'm not exactly sure of the value of the Frost Queen's claim. I need to go back and take a look at those games because I think that you're right that it's easy to pick up the flaws in that item when it's not, when Mikhail's could have been there. But I'd like to go back and see how effective it was at other points in the game because I don't think, looked enough at the upsides of that item in order to make a solid statement. My feeling is still that in most cases the Mikhail's would be, because like Mikhail's prevents you from like losing a game or losing a team fight, whereas like Frost Queen's claim maybe gets you a pick or like occasionally. I just see that the value of Mikhail's in most situations or the potential cost in terms of the game is lower with a Mikhail's than with a Frost Queen's claim. So I don't know. I need to go back. I'm going to take a look at some of those games again and see what I think. And I'm going to keep an eye out for it in the next couple groups starting in a couple days. So for me, the jury's still out on that one. There must be a reason why all these Korean supports are thinking that way. Whether they're right or not, I don't know.
I mean, that's the reason why, like, listen, I don't have a reason as to why they do it, so I'm not saying that it's wrong as a judgment. In fact, the way it was articulated was very interesting from Krepo, so I think, yeah, definitely had a point there. But it just was interesting to me, because here's the thing. If Zero does it and Royal Club lose a game, then we can definitely look at a point and go, okay, maybe he did it wrong there. But I noticed Mata did it nearly all the time as well. And the thing with the really high level Koreans is they don't do anything by accident. Like everything they do has been rigorously play tested, and they have a rationale behind it. We don't know what it is at the moment. I hope someone can maybe ask them in an interview. I'll try asking Travis or something if he interviews one of them. But there's obviously some sort of rationale as to what they want to do. I mean, the obvious answer with that is if you're ahead, then yeah, it makes it easier in a team fight because you just put the slow on them, and then you can definitely land that Nami bubble, and then the team fight's over. But it's true, in certain games when you were behind, it was strange to rush it, because actually you're probably not going to get that off if your team is behind in that sense. Like it's not going to be as valuable, you know.
No, it's not compared to Mikhail's and the sustain you have during the team fights. It was interesting. I'm not sure exactly what to think about that.
But I actually had another point to make along the lines of itemization, which is that, I mean, I'll try looking it up now, but someone made a point, I think it might have been on Twitter, about Mata, and I can't remember if it was because he bought all the wards, or let me see here. Okay, yeah, at the end of that first game versus EDG, all Mata had was Frost Queen's Claim, Mikhail's, and a Ruby Sightstone, and mobility boots with Home Guard. So essentially, he actually like rushed the Frost Queen's Claim. He got Mikhail's. Okay, Mikhail's a standard. But then he went Ruby Sightstone, and he never went any defensive items. Remember, Mikhail's is just like cooldown reduction, a bit of magic resist, I think, and like...
Yeah, besides the Sightstone, yeah.
But no, yeah, but he got the extra health, okay. But he's not getting any locket or anything like that. And so the reason why I thought I'd bring this up is, first of all, that part of the reason why is because he bought a fucking million wards. Like, if we added up the gold of how many pink wards he bought, that's like almost 2,000 by itself.
Yeah, 1,900 gold.
So there's that. And then on top of that, this might sound weird, but this is like just something that it can just tell you how good Mata is. Even in scenarios like this, he's just so confident he's never going to miss position that he doesn't need the defensive item.
Well, I mean, that's a pretty standard build for a lot of supports right now. If you buy an Aegis, that's a lot of money to spend, and like something that most junglers can get anyway. So, except for Kha'Zix, well, some of the high damage junglers, Rengar too. But on Elise Lee Sin, that's something you can buy if you need to. But yeah, I think that it's all it's
but I think in general you saw that
totally
from
necessary.
He's willing to take risks in itemization because he's just that good. He can work around what the weakness of it is, you know.
Sure. Who knows if that game had gone on longer too, what exactly he would have bought. What's interesting in that game too is I think he only bought like a very few number of green wards, and then all the rest of his like 80 wards just came out of his Sightstone and his trinket. He wasn't actually buying like 80 wards in that game. He did buy 19 pink wards, but the rest of them were just all from his Sightstone, because he got a very early Sightstone that game because he killed Name in lane.
Yeah.
So I think he got the first blood gold that game. So he was able to get some pretty early items, and therefore he didn't actually have to buy that many wards. Like green wards, that is.
In terms of EDG overall, here's the funny thing. They clearly underperformed. Like, I thought they would be potentially contending with White, whereas they only really did a little bit in game one. But with that said, I think people have gone too far the other way. Like, I think, here's my theory on it, Monty. Because really, it's almost impossible now that a Samsung Ozone of last year is going to happen again. Like, odds on that happening are so low that people can't really get excited that a Korean team's going to get stomped. So what happens is, if a Chinese team loses, at least that's like another set of really dominant Asians, and okay, at least we can say that they're overrated and they weren't ever as good. Like, it may turn out that EDG maybe aren't good versus international competition. Maybe it'll even turn out they're chokers when it comes to these big moments. But they are still a very good team, and the analysis coming into the tournament was still accurate because it was based on fucking two splits of LPL. They didn't get totally stomped in this group. Even the game they lost to AHQ. I saw someone say this, okay. People were painting that game, Monty, as though AHQ like destroyed them. EDG destroyed themselves in that game. That's a game where until they lost, I bet Monty was loving it because EDG was playing like shit. They were getting no kills. They had no actual scenarios where they were getting picks and kills, yet they had that game closed out to like this much, and then they just didn't.
Well, they weren't trying to. They were running like that siege comp, right? They were
just taking towers, rotating, coming back, never taking a risk, playing safe.
It was great. They played it out very smoothly in the mid game, and then they hit this like little bump where they refused to siege and they started going for Baron, which was the wrong call. And then they just didn't itemize properly, and by the time they were trying to siege in late game, they got engaged on in like the only possible way they could get engaged on. And they didn't have an answer for that. They didn't think their itemization through, given the scenario that they had. And Ardent Sensor was just like the weirdest item for FCZF to have ever. It was really bad. And so, yeah, the lack of Crucible cost them. That was like it really was the crucial thing about that game. They had double QSS, and there were only 2 forms of engage: Deathmark from Zed and a hook.
So in the end, they didn't have Mikhail's Crucible, but they did find themselves in Monte's Crucible, where you should be able to close this game out, but incorrect suboptimal itemization has now cost you a guaranteed win.
Well, and they did that really dumb Baron fight. Like, you don't Baron fight with that team composition. You're too squishy. You need to just siege up and siege a tower forever until you break them. Yeah, so it was just they played out their composition incorrectly, and it was a bummer because they played it out really, really well in the early and mid game. It was also something that they were definitely not used to playing because we had only seen you play Jace once in the LPL previously. This is like his second Jace game. So I'm not entirely confident that they knew exactly what they were doing.
I think that also, by the way, Monty, feeds into what I said before, but it's possible these teams didn't play. It's not that they didn't play seriously. They just played, but they didn't use all their strongest shit. Because that's the thing. Not only did we see that, but another factor we'll come into later is that all these Chinese teams keep picking Rise all the time, whereas they don't. These are not the Rise players in China. These guys.
Only Go Going picks Rise.
I mean,
yeah.
So I mean, listen, you don't want to go too far and make out like they're not taking anyone seriously, but I think sometimes they thought if we can win this game without having to use our strongest picks, and so they don't get banned in the playoffs, let's do it. You know. Also, in that game, Monty, to give some credit to AHQ. One of the big reasons AHQ won that game also is that, like, first of all, Westdoor was on Zed. So if you want to catch someone and do a shit ton of burst damage to them and kill them, well, that's the fucking champion right there. You need an assassin player. That's like fit the bill in, right? We need assassin player, plays something like Zed. He's actually doing pretty well in the game. He has some of the kills on him. Like, he was the guy who won them the game, basically.
Absolutely. Yeah. Him and Green Tea, they made the plays where they needed to make plays, and that's a credit to AHQ. They played better than I think anybody thought they were going to.
Because if we go down to the AHQ part of the graph, Monty, the gold for Westdoor goes off the fucking chart, off the graph itself, into like the ether or like the whatever is outside the known universe. It just like exits reality. It's like, yeah, that guy's pretty much your god, AHQ. You should bow before him every day and sacrifice like B team players to his might or something. Like, I don't know what he's doing, but he's carrying those guys.
Yeah, he absolutely is, and especially considering how little gold their AD carry and jungler got, Garnet Devil and Nas. I mean, that's crazy how much. I mean, he's a very good player.
I mean, that was actually something I tweeted after the AHQ game. And I wasn't being BM when I said it. After watching TPA and AHQ, and they each had games where they would look good, but then obviously most of the time they didn't have players who could sustain that. They maybe had the one star player in each team, and they had a one player who'd have a good game here, but then he'd regress to the mean. He'd have a bad game next. It really said to me that if Southeast Asia wants to have a really good team, they could have a team, okay, that could have made the playoffs here, but they probably need to have Westdoor and Wins on the same team, I think. This tournament so far just tells me that.
Yeah,
you can't have so little talent and have them split apart.
And
like
Pride's is pretty good in the top lane too.
But I mean, those are clearly the two best players.
Yeah. Yes, clearly.
And so you got to, especially come on, man, when they're jungler and mid, you got to try that out. So, let's see, going forwards. Okay, that's Group A. There's nothing really more to say about that. So Group B.
We should probably take a break before we do Group B.
Yeah, that's true. We'll take a break now so we can get a drink or something. So back after these messages. Okay, we have returned from our commercial break here. The sponsors have gotten their money or given their money to. I don't even know how that works, Monty. I'm not a professional person in that sense. Something happens that allows me to stay employed. So in Group B, the first team we have to talk about, the group winners, StarHorn Royal Club. Now, coming into this group, here's what's funny, Monty. I always kind of make light of the fact that people go way too hard on drama and on weird kind of side things that don't always impinge on the game. And one of those is that if anyone in the team is fighting or there's some sort of disagreement or they don't seem to be on the same page, it's true that might impinge their performance. And certainly you have to put it in as a factor. But I don't know if you saw this trend, but people pretty much made out as though, like, when they saw that tweet from Uzi, they were like, right, well, I guess StarHorn Royal Club's ruined. He probably won't go to the tournament. They'll definitely won't even get out the group. TSM will beat them in every game. And it's like, you've drawn way too much from there. Like, first of all, you can have good... Okay, maybe you can speak to this, Monty. Within teams that are being successful, while being successful, players can have disagreements and there can be friction, right?
Of course, yeah. There usually are.
It's just we don't ever see it. It's behind the closed doors and it gets dealt with somehow. And sometimes, in fact, having a disagreement, but then playing the game and maybe seeing that someone was right or you try something. And sometimes that's what actually resolves some of these issues. It's not like they're not going to hate each other forever, you know. And winning always patches that shit up.
Yeah, typically.
Because coming into this group, I think people were they were wondering, is Royal Club even going to be that strong? But you saw from the way the group played out, they were clearly the strongest team, right?
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, yes. I mean, a lot of TSM fans are going to argue that TSM was the better team. Perhaps. I would not ever argue that in a million years.
What basis that would ever be argued, but I mean, I would guess the main reasons would be Bay Life, American Pie, Chinese teams only play in China. How many LCS splits have Royal Club won? You know, all the good ones. But, you know, jokes aside, but yeah, in terms of overall, if I had to guess, remember, at all times, people, I have like a mental link with Monte where I sort of like, it's sort of like Dropbox or something. When he uploads something into his mind, I get like a fragment of it and I can sense like what's going on. So I always have a gauge on where Monte is on something. I would guess, without having talked to you, that you were probably, that Royal Club were actually maybe even a little stronger than you thought.
Yeah, they were a little bit stronger than I thought. I mean, obviously, I think it's reasonable to be concerned about these things. They're not indicative of potential weakness, especially when they happen weeks beforehand. There's a lot of time to sort these issues out. And if there's one thing we've seen from players like Uzi is that he always competes like pretty darn well, or he plays the same style no matter what happens. And he's no stranger to high pressure situations and international tournaments at this point. So. And he's been performing really, really nicely. But from my perspective, from watching the LPL playoffs and the regionals where Royal was getting kicked around by OMG a bit, especially in the playoffs, and then they kind of came through later on. They definitely look like a stronger team now than we just saw them a few weeks ago. And whether that's because they were against soft competition, which is definitely something to keep in mind, or that these kind of losses to OMG, which were a bit surprising because those games were pretty sloppy overall, was just a condition of the fact that they're weak to the OMG when they have like their two very, very good solo laners. It's an interesting question. I think that Uzi is like tunneling on the Caitlyn pick right now, and I think that's a lot of the reason why they lost the game to TSM, because Caitlyn's not being played by anybody else for a reason. It's just not as strong as a lot of the other AD carries at the moment, and it's not the same kind of hyper carry as like a Tristana or a Kog'Maw. So yeah, I think Royal overall was stronger than I thought they would be, but I anticipated that they would do fine just because I think that on a skirmish and mechanical level, that's like the number one thing that allows you to win a game of League of Legends. And then if you have equal mechanics, that's when the strategy will carry you forward. So I just thought that against any non-Korean team, that nobody would have a whole lot of a chance. Now, that was obviously incorrect. TSM did manage to take a game off of them, and TSM did play pretty well in that game.
But I mean, that's what was borne out in this group, was that, okay, here's the weird thing about Royal Club. They remind me of when we gave credit later on in the season to LMQ, and we said that, okay, it's not just that they're like a bull in a china shop just smashing everything up and they don't know what they're doing and they just brute force everything. They do brute force to a degree in the sense that they make the decider of every moment of their game a fight. They're going to have a team fight, and they're going to win by outskilling you. So in a sense, that is brute forcing it. When there are times when, if you're ahead, you just do what EDG did in the game they were losing. They lost to HQ, where you just close the game out, and actually you don't give the opponent a chance to even fight you and have a chance. LMQ, Royal Club, and OMG don't do that. But I did notice it's like they understood their own strength themselves, which is if it gets to the late game and we're not really behind, we're going to win these team fights. Because 3 games they had in this group where it was close. They had their first game against TPA, they had the game against SK, and then they had the game at the end against TSM. 2 of the 3 times the same thing happened. They were in position to maybe lose the game, but then every time it's like there was a it's almost like Uzi has his own like little rise timer where it's like, oh, you let Uzi get to 40 minutes and he hasn't been killed 7 times, you just lose the game automatically. Like once you get to that point, that's when like it's like they have, okay, Uzi has his own power spike, Monty, doesn't he? When it kicks in, that's when you just lose the game, right? Overall.
It depends on the champion he has. He was obviously much more dominant on Tristana. I think moving forward, I'm not sure how much Royal was still working with their fast push strategies because they liked the Nami Caitlyn, they liked the Janna Caitlyn because it allows you to get those early towers. But TSM didn't hold on long enough to make it a real, like to come back and win that game. So I mean, they did well. But still, Royal looked pretty consistent in what they were doing. I don't think we're going to see probably a lot more Caitlyn moving forward. I think that was just what they were doing, and unless they want to take that fast push risk again. But they did win a game in China recently doing that. But I think everybody's kind of wise to their antics right now, so it probably isn't the best idea to continue to run with the Caitlyn. And if Uzi, I think, just goes on to normal, more standard, more meta carries, or even Vayne right now, it's going to be a lot better. And as for had StarHorn and TSM faced again, I think StarHorn would have done a lot better in the rematch. And regardless, I think TSM would have been leaving that group in second place, even if they had beaten SK.
What's interesting, though, is when I was watching Uzi, I was watching him, and I actually have I think I have like an interesting conclusion for you, Monty. He's actually really weird. If you know his personality, he has that double lift personality, okay, where he has his own way that he's going to play the game, and he's going to do it that way, and there's almost no point arguing with him because that's just how he's going to play it, and you can't convince him otherwise. And unfortunately, he's good enough that it's going to work sometimes, and then when it works, then you definitely can never convince him otherwise because now he just made it work. That's even worse, you know. The only time you have a chance with these guys is if they're totally broken. Then you can sort of get in there while the consciousness is fresh to be reprogrammed and do your work. I know I'm preaching to the choir here, Monty, but anyway, the reason why I bring this up is because when I watched these games, I actually noticed that a really positive quality of Uzi, which is going to sound really abstract, is that he plays the exact same style and the exact same approach, regardless of what is happening at any point in the game. So even if his team is losing and loses the game, he will play the same in the team fight as he would have in a team fight that they would have won. And actually, usually he isn't the factor that loses. Like he's not radically mispositioning against lesser opponents like these. And so what happens is, in the team fight, you can see it in the TSM game, for example, there was a team fight they had at the bottom side of River where he was Caitlyn and he tried to do like the team kill of everyone, but he just failed at the end. And part of the reason he failed was the support being out of position and setting off the Monsoon slightly out of range and all. Every factor that made the fight fail was actually everyone else's, what they did slightly wrong. He played it exactly the same way he would have. If they'd have landed all that, he would have come in and that would have been the highlight clip. That would have been the Uzi highlight, right?
Right, and I think it's very interesting you notice that because also it applies to his laning phase. If you watch the way he lanes, it like doesn't matter really what champion he's on. He always walks really far up. He makes you fight for every single CS that you get. He plays much more aggressively and with very like forward zoning style that it makes you vulnerable to ganks. It does. Like he kind of plays balls to the wall crazy. Now he denies a lot of CS when he does that, and that's why he's able to crush people in lane so hard. But it does demand a lot of attention from Insect down there and, you know, some pretty solid warding in order to make sure that you don't just up and die in that scenario.
That's why I made the joke, Monty, that Uzi is living the life that Doublelift dreams he has. He's not just the AD carry star. He's like, we can't even call him hyper carry anymore. He's just like, in his world, he is like fucking some sort of galactic cosmic level god. And everyone else is just like his followers who feed him the mana to do his shit, you know.
It's pretty crazy how he plays, I will say that. It's really strange.
But the funny
really
thing is,
strange.
The reason why I brought it up is because it actually relates to like a sports psychology point that's actually relevant, which is that the great players in certain sports, the two that came to mind was in like boxing or MMA, when you're actually practicing like striking techniques, one of the problems is that when you practice, you just punch a bag, okay? And when you punch the bag, obviously your fist stops where the bag meets, right? And so actually, believe it or not, you might know this since you've done some Muay Thai, but most people who train in these sports, unless you have a really good trainer, will actually learn inefficient technique. Because what happens is you punch, and then when your hand is used to hitting the bag, because you know roughly the distance once you've hit it a few times, you instinctively stop, and you just stop as your punch hits, okay? Whereas actually the way you get full power is you have to imagine the bag doesn't exist and you punch through it, because the technique is that you're going to punch and that guy's head's going to go that way. It's not going to be like a bag that's going to come back. You're actually going to punch through him. And the idea is you're going to throw that technique like that regardless of whether he's there or not, so that when your timing is right, he's going to be there when you do it. And so it's like a weird
And
concept.
also part of punching through is that you have to pull your hand back really quickly as well. So, you know, that's part of what's exhausting. Like punching bag is easy if you're not concentrating on punching through and then pulling back as fast as possible as well to keep your guard up.
Because there's a similar concept, right, in the NBA, which is that the players who are amazing at hitting those buzzer beaters, where you take a jump shot and it's like the game's on the line, and if you lose, it's obvious why most people can't make them because of the factor of, like, you know, it's the pressure and all that. But actually, another reason why some of them can't make them is that when you're in those moments, the defender knows, okay, I don't want to foul you. So instead, what I do is I just try and make it really awkward for you. Like, I'll put my hand right in your face as you shoot the shot, or I'll just like jump over here or something. And so the idea is it's going to be a bit different from when you normally practice your shot. So the best players at making those shots are the ones who mentally can make the shot into a standard practice shot. Like, I do this 1,000 times in practice, and no matter where the defender goes and what he does, and there's actually videos of this, believe it or not, where some of these guys can hit these jump shots while the guy's hand goes like this as he releases the ball. The guy's hand goes over his face. So it should be impossible. Anyone else in the world, first of all, would flinch and then would like miss the shot and all that. But the idea is he's practiced the form so much that he just does it anyway, regardless of what happens. I think that's actually like a relevant point. That's like the way Uzi plays. Like, I mean, no one else can do it, because to do it, you have to be at the level of Uzi and Imp, etc., where you're so confident in your skills and you know that you will dominate, that the idea is like, it really is like, if I just do what I can do, I probably will win the game. Everyone else has to some degree, be reactive, okay? Sometimes they have to play a bit more defensively in a fight you're losing or something, but I think it was interesting to note, because if you are that level, I think you do have to have a different mentality to a degree, especially if you want to hard carry every game. You have to be willing to do this, right?
Sure, and I think that's, you know, we can talk about Name with that as well, and his kind of mispositioning and stuff like that. It was like he wasn't playing that same game. He wasn't playing with respect in regards to the hooks, or, you know, he just wasn't in that same mental space.
Yeah, he was like, he wasn't in. Like, that's another reason why I wasn't that convinced by the HQ loss, because it's not like he got uber mispositioned against the Samsung team. So if that had happened there, then it might have been more telling. Whereas this looked more like, well, there's no way we're going to lose this game, so it almost doesn't matter what I do now, that's when fucking classic mistakes fall in if you're the overdog and you lose to an underdog, right?
I think that's why Samsung White loses a lot of the time, too.
Like, let me think what else to talk about here. Oh, we have to talk about Insec, obviously. Now, I want us to put this in context, Monty, because on one hand, if people have watched any of our shows, I actually think you go too hard on Insec. Like, I think when you bring up that fucking your beloved Masters KDA stat, I think you go too far there, because even you wouldn't always use that kind of stat to make the same conclusion. Like, I get that you're saying like his stats were really bad, and then
I
he was never the worst. He was never actually the worst jungler in all of Masters. Don't tell me that bullshit. He wasn't. He might have had the worst KDA, but he wasn't the worst jungler. Don't say that.
Okay, maybe he wasn't, but he was definitely bottom of the barrel. Like, if we just look at the games the KT Bullets were playing at the time, it was pretty awful.
I mean, he wasn't worse than whoever the fuck is the jungler for, like, Incredible Miracle or Big File or whatever. He wasn't worse than them. Don't tell me that. That is not true.
Big File wasn't in Masters, but yeah, sure, he was.
Incredible Miracle. He wasn't worse than those guys. Like, he had redeeming qualities that were better than they have on their upside, right?
Sure, but I mean, he was still very bottom of the barrel in that situation, and there's a reason why no Korean team took him.
Okay, I've got to bring you up again now, Monty. That's another thing you always say. That's also your patented catchphrase. But you have to admit this as well. One of the other reasons why no Korean takes him is because he is very famous for having a really stubborn attitude and potentially like that plays into it as well. Like, here's something I'll just tell you, because people behind the scenes maybe don't know. Part of the reason why people like Macnoon and Prey, these guys, we all know they're good and they were great players. The reason they don't get even a chance on some of the lesser teams is actually because if they have a negative rep for whatever reason in the community, like in the industry side, that'll make teams think to themselves, like, do I want to try on a guy who, yeah, he's a bit washed up, but he probably could maybe have a renaissance, but I could also try this guy who's unproven, but I know he's got no personality issues, and I could sort of mold him to how I want. They usually in Korea are going to go with the latter option, right? Even though me and you would be like, oh, come on, we want to see Macnoon. They probably won't go with that option.
Yeah. There are a bunch of reasons. I mean, I'm not going to go into what I know about all these players that you just mentioned, but some of them I think are valid. Some of them I think are less valid. But yeah,
I'm just
Insect
giving
definitely.
examples. That's not exactly like why those players aren't in.
Yeah, I think Insect definitely didn't have the best reputation from a coaching perspective or a teammate perspective. Wasn't the worst either by any means. But that coupled with his lackluster performance, and he just doesn't seem to fix his flaws. You know,
I
that's the
feel
thing
like
about him.
I've always said this concept, Monty. Once you reach a certain level of how good you are as an individual player, it actually doesn't matter if in theory you're weak at your position. If you had the right composition of teammates, you could be successful and you could maybe even win. I've always said this. So for example, a great example is, I've mentioned this many times, two of the best examples of all time are Moscow 5's lineup and Cloud9's lineup. Some of these players, I'm not exaggerating, if you put them in the second best team in their region, would be dog shit. They would actually be negative presences in terms of like the weakness here would be so glaring. But what's great about those two teams, what makes them magical lineups, is that it's like the strengths of the other players cover the flaws of their teammates and the weaknesses of their teammates. And so in that respect, so for example, an obvious example is, okay, we know Genji is too passive and he only wants to farm and he never wants to go for the trade. So what do you want to do if you want to cover that? Why don't we give him the most aggressive support ever, who's mechanically really good and who can actually fight without follow-up? Like, that's like if we were designing this team, that's how we'd have to cover that guy's flaw, right?
It's one way to do it, I would say.
So where this leads to is,
yes, with Uzi
like,
and
this is like
the rest of that
Insect
team.
has the perfect team. So we've got a guy, okay, he likes to play super ham aggressive jungle champions. He never communicates well. He's famous for mispositioning and that. And he doesn't always know where to go. He's not dandy. He doesn't always know where to go on the map, like where the enemy jungler will always be. So here's what I'm going to do, Monty. I need to give him a chance to play all those hyper ridiculous champions. So we can't have him in Korea because actually sometimes you don't always play those champions. Let's put him in China where actually Rengar's being played all the time and you can play retarded shit. And the other jungler sometimes doesn't even show up on the map at any point until the late game.
Clear Love. You mean Clear Love, who just like AFKs for most of the game?
Let's make it so he doesn't even know how to speak the same language as his team. There's that problem taken care of. Any mispositioning is now inherently blamed on that. It's not his Insect's fault. And finally, this team is just all about ganking bot lane anyway. So he knows at all times, just keep your eye on the bot lane. That's, he doesn't, it's problem solved, right?
Yeah, I mean, I've said that too, is that when you like to skirmish that much and when you are going to get into risky situations with Uzi, that it does help to, have that kind of situation where, and, he does have established synergy with Zero as well from their time on KT together. So, and Zero does like to play a little bit more aggressively. He likes to play more high damage supports, generally speaking. I mean, he first kind of burst onto the scene for playing Leona and support Vel'Koz. And he played him well.
By the way, that's actually another factor. Even though, let's be honest, yeah, Zero is not close to the level of Amato. Okay? He's not even in that realm. But he actually does play. It's not like he's a scrub getting carried by Uzi. Like, actually, what's funny is he's like fit his game to Uzi's really well. Like, where someone found that piece of trivia where like Zero on Janna runs like attack damage runes or something retarded.
Yeah, he does.
Like well, if you think about it, you're already not used to playing some fucking uber juggernaut AD carry who's going to contest every CS and deny you every single one. Like, even when he could just take his and maybe deny you, he'd rather just deny you outright so he has double yours. On top of that, now you have a fucking support, and that Janna auto attack is annoying as fuck if you're laying against it. Just constantly auto attacking you. It's like, how am I supposed to learn against it? No one's played against that in the West or in other regions,
I mean, objectively, Hybrid Pen is still probably better, especially if you're going to build a Magi Soul Stealer, if you want to just do more damage in the late game. But yeah, it's certainly surprising in lane, and it does allow them to trade harder early, which does feed into Uzi's style, right?
I mean, they're just saying, listen, we're going all in that we're going to dominate this lane. We're definitely going to win this lane. I can tell you that much, my friend. We are going to win this lane.
It's true, and they do a good job of zoning people out and making sure that they get that big CS advantage and put some pressure on there. Also makes it extremely difficult to gank Uzi and Zero because your carry and support are constantly chunked, and so to all in them can be super dangerous, especially if Insect shows up. Then you have like a chunked AD and a chunk support against 3 full health members. It's a pain in the ass.
But we have to give props to Insec. In general, he was really good in this group.
He was very good.
This was him at his best. He was in his full feral form, and he was just doing a great job.
I mean, to be fair, his jungle competition was amazing. Half of the time it was Gilius, and the other time it was Wins, who didn't show up on anything but Lee Sin. So it's not like he had the best junglers to play against either. Kind of easy to look good in that group.
That's actually one of the downsides of the Svenskeren issues. I was hoping to see Svenskeren versus him twice, because their style of play would have actually been a really cool matchup. Because actually Svenskeren's the kind of guy who wants to face that sort of a jungler. So
he does, absolutely. Yeah, he really likes to go in and into those 1v1s. He likes to get into the enemy's jungle. He plays that aggressive style, and Svenskeren's really good. So, and also, I mean, it's not really an excuse because, I mean, SK did get bodied pretty hard by StarHorn even in the second game. But that was Svenskeren's like first game back in after his suspension, and he didn't seem to be going as hard as he did in some of the other games there. But then again, Insec is a much more difficult opponent for Svenskeren than, Wins are amazing.
So obviously TSM we'll talk about next. The first thing I have to ask about TSM, one of the things it's like a pet peeve of mine that I always go on about is when people draw really strong conclusions from like one game or something. And so when TSM lost and got utterly stomped by Royal Club, it was like the end of the world. The West is total trash. They will never even get a kill on a Chinese team. It's all over, game over. So then when they won, then it went the other way. Oh, they've proven they're better, and actually China's not a superior region. Like all these really crazy swings of logic back and forth. When they lost to Royal Club, listen, here's the funny thing. I actually was surprised they got stomped that hard. I actually thought that would be I thought these would be two competitive games, and I thought Royal Club would win them both, but I thought they would be both competitive games. So I'm actually surprised that they got ultra stomped in the first game. That just seemed to me. Okay, I've got a question for you here. Everyone tried to blame the first loss to Royal Club on picks and bans. Now I've got to pull people up on this. It could be right that they made some mistakes in picks and bans, like giving comfort picks to Royal. But you can't give credit to the coaching staff of TSM every time they win, and then when they lose, say it was picks and bans, but don't say anything about the coaching staff. Someone's making a mistake here if it's a loss in picks and bans on the drafting phase and the research and knowing what the opponent wants, right?
I would say so. That would be my opinion.
Were you as convinced that it was lost in pick ban?
Let me just review that game really quick. Let me see here. They Royal banned Nidalee, which was weird. I remember that game. TSM banned Fizz, Lee Sin, Lucian. Not really sure why TSM is so worried about Lucian, because they gave up the Tristana pick in the second rotation. Because no, they didn't lose this pick because that was the weird thing we talked about in the analyst desk. Was look, this could have been taken out of context because it was like a Riot produced video that was like a teaser that we used to start one of the days. But amazing was like they just took the sound clip, and I don't know if there was more context to this. I don't, but it was very weird because he said like, well, we just took our comfort picks, Zed and Rise first, and we realized that was a mistake. Okay, I promise you that if anybody gives a first rotation red side Zed and Rise to Naj and White Shield, that you are going to lose that game. Okay? There's not a problem with those picks. At all. At all. Dyrus is just bad at Rise. That's the difference. He played really, really poorly against the Aurelia. Because that was the game where Cola was maxing E on Aurelia. And we were sitting there.
He got out of control from all the ganks, didn't he?
Yeah, he got out of control from all the ganks. And we were sitting there, and Crumbs was on the desk, and he was like, I'm pretty sure Dyrus has never played against an Emax Aurelia before in lane. We were just sitting there during the game chatting, and it certainly looked that way after he mentioned it. I definitely started looking at that a little more deeply. But they also, the first pick Zillion, I think that they probably thought it was support, even though a lot of Korean and Chinese teams still play Zillion mid. And, I mean, the comp that they got was Rengar, Zillion, Tristana, Aurelia, Janna. That's like a hugely fast speed comp for Rengar to create picks on, for Aurelia to create picks on, and I don't think they were ready for that level of aggression, and they got pretty bodied in that game. The second one that they played, take a look at the draft in that game. So they reacted by banning the Zillion Rengar, still banning the Lucian. I think that and this is very interesting from TSM because they're really worried about this Lucian pick from Uzi because Lucian's a very lane dominant champion, and that just goes to show that they don't have a lot of confidence in Turtle's ability to survive a Lucian lane. It's a little worrying. Yeah, the StarHorn's draft was weird in the second game. Like, they picked the Fizz, which I don't think was very good with their composition. With the Caitlyn, like, that didn't make a lot of sense. If they're going to pick John and Caitlyn, they should pick a wave clear mid so they can fast push more effectively. And then Dyrus played really well on Rumble in that game. That was most of the reason why they won. But I don't think TSM's going to get Rumble for the rest of the tournament, really.
Okay, so I've got a few points we can bounce off from what you said there. So you mentioned Wild Turtle there. On that preview show, Monty, where you ranked the AD carries and you put Turtle 4th out of 4. Here's the thing, okay? I can actually understand why you put him below Candy Panda, because Candy Panda was playing a very solid game within his limits, knowing how to work with his team, and his team just had a very good performance in Europe, and okay, that all makes sense. Even though objectively Wild Turtle might be more skilled, Candy Panda, I can see why you would rank him above Wild Turtle, okay. But the one I think you went too far with is, why did you rank Bebe above Wild Turtle?
Yeah, I think I deserve criticism for that. Just because the way that TPA works and just observing BB is that, yes, he doesn't have the best synergy with his support, but he really does carry very nicely in team fights, and which could be said of Wild Turtle as well. But I just think BB is more consistent in the team fighting phase of the game. But I think that probably Turtle is a little bit better than BB after seeing the world stuff. But just watching him in GPL, that was kind of my opinion. I think Candy Panda 2 also just really didn't play well.
He was quite poor this tournament.
I mean, he stepped it up by the time.
The one game at the end, sure, yeah. Yeah, but in those first 3 games, he was one of the weak spots for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, to be fair, in that group, if we're realistic, yeah, I had to rank them 1 through 4. But the gap between 1 and 2 was like significant, and then the gap between 2 and 4 was like not that much, right? So that's just kind of one of the things that had to happen there. But yeah, really, I mean, obviously Uzi is like a million times better than any of these other ADs, but I had to rank them 1 through 4. Sure. I couldn't just get 50 points and say 40 points go to Uzi or 35 points go to Uzi, and then we just divide the other 15 among these guys.
So I mean, actually, on the topic of Bebe, though, or Baby, or whatever you say it, he was one of the players where he was a bit underwhelming for me, because actually TPA in general, we're going to talk about them later, but actually I thought he was one of those guys where he had like a good game early and that lulled you into thinking he was going to be stronger than he was, and then he actually just like, you saw what he was after you saw all the other games play, like, okay, actually he's just an okay player. He wasn't some star player even from their region necessarily. He's just a good player.
Yeah, he was all right. He did have some good games on Lucian.
So also on the TSM topic, let me think. Oh, I had one point to bring up actually that you mentioned. One of the interesting trends I noticed in this tournament is not only were these Chinese teams playing Rise repeatedly, and like I say, it's not just that they don't play Rise. The people who do play Rise in China aren't these players. That's why it's weird. But secondly, these Chinese teams don't seem to have any clue what happens when you play against Rumble in top lane. Like, they look totally lost. Like, actually, that's why when you mentioned that we won't see Rumble again, I guarantee you, if any of these teams, like, for example, if EDG had been playing, like, TSM, I'm pretty sure they would have just banned Rumble every game.
Yeah.
They were just taking care of it like that.
I mean, some of the Chinese teams play Rumble. If you remember, there was a lot of Rumble.
I think it was just PDD
year.
Back in the day, though.
No,
I don't think anyone plays it now.
No. Because Godlike and Going played Rumble at Worlds last year. But
okay.
There was a lot of Rumble in China, but not this
I don't think this year, though.
No, last year there was a lot.
Okay.
But yeah, I just think it was funny because in that game, like, Cola playing Rise, like, obviously had no idea how to play against Rumble because he, like, was standing there and not punishing Dyrus as hard as he could have when, like, Dyrus tried to trade with him. And then he also just got, like, straight up soloed by Dyrus. And obviously Dyrus is very comfortable on Rumble right now and he carried that game for sure. He played really well. But yeah, it was pretty poor Rise play at the same time.
You know what the problem here, though, is, Monty? This is where I get bummed by how the group shook out. Because when I saw that, I thought to myself, like, wait a minute. balls is a legendary Rumble player. Oh shit, he hasn't got a Chinese team in his group. Never mind. Like if they'd have been in Group B or Group C, that could have been fun. That might have been a.
You know who else is a legendary Rumble player?
Do tell me.
Acorn.
Okay.
Acorn rose up through the ranks back when he went by his former ID Chunju.
Yeah.
Basically, Rumble was banned against him every game when he was back earlier in MVP Blue and Samsung Blue because he was just like known as this like ridiculous Rumble main, and if you let him have it, then you were going to lose the game. And so it was in meta, out of meta. It was like banned against him every.
So let's see what happens when he plays LMQ and OMG then.
We'll see. I'm hoping he busts it out again. It's definitely one of his favorite picks. I don't know if Blue will want to play Rumble, but he definitely can. And we haven't seen it in a long time, but it's definitely always been there for him. So I'm curious if he's been practicing it again or if he's willing to run it again. He's definitely dimensionalized his champion pool a lot since then, so maybe he won't. But it would be fun to see him bust it out one more time.
Okay, as far as I know, I'm just checking now to double check that I'm correct on this. But actually, in this group stage, yeah, as far as I can tell, in this group stage, Amazing played Elise or Lee Sin every game. In fact, I think he played at least once in Lee Sin every single other group stage game that he played. So that was actually interesting. Like no one tried the target ban basically. I think the other teams in that group, they all had a star jungler in theory, so no one thought it was that key.
No, it really wasn't that key, and it won't be that key in their quarterfinal match either, which is scary because like the thing that TSM has to deeply consider right now is do they ban any junglers at all? Like because a lot of people just straight up ban Lee Sin against Dandy, and Dandy doesn't need that Lee Sin. He can sit on Rengar, he can sit on he can do whatever the hell he wants. Yep. So, but if you give him Lee Sin, he's obviously like 1,000,000 times more dangerous. But if you don't take Lee Sin, if you're Amazing, then you're not really that great.
That also, unfortunately, kind of tips your hand because it means if you're first pick and you didn't ban Lee Sin or Elise, I wonder what's going to come in the first pick here, guys. So then they can even bank on that to a degree, right?
Yeah, it's bad. I would say that the pick and ban phase is really not looking good for TSM going in. Because they either give up Lee Sin first pick. Because frankly, if I was white going into this, for blue or red side, I would just first pick Lee Sin. Because you don't have to have any other priorities, right? You could just prioritize Lee Sin. Why the hell not? And if TSM doesn't also prioritize Lee Sin, it hurts them a lot more than it hurts white. It's like, okay, well you took Lee Sin, you were blue side first pick. Okay, well we get whatever, we can save our jungle pick now. So unless they're going to like ban 2 or more junglers, which would be a terrible idea, really. I don't know what TSM is going to do in terms of picks and bans. Like I can't even begin to wrap my mind around like White's pick and ban phase if I was going to play them. Like obviously I can explain it as it plays out. But if you asked me to come up with a situation where I knew TSM's champion pools and I was trying to design compositions, I think you just have to like, I don't know. If I was them, I'd just ban Rengar because you don't know how to play against it because no team has ever played it against you well. I would probably ban Thresh. I would just ban their playmaking champions that they're too good with. I would ban Thresh, Rengar.
You've also got a problem though, Monty, which is that you've also got more crossover. Like for example, like something like Nami will probably be heavily contested because both of those players, that's like one of their best champions, right?
Nah, because Mata might just play Braum.
Okay.
So, and just lane swap or whatever. They'll just run a Twitch Braum.
That's actually a key champion for Lost Boys.
I would actually ban Twitch. I would ban Twitch too, because Turtle doesn't play it. I would ban Twitch, Thresh, Rengar. That's what I would do. And then just pray, basically. Pray that you get something good. Or like what I would do with them is you have to just go in with your own plan about several team comps that you could run based around numerous ban scenarios. Because like the other thing about White is they're probably not even going to ban Zed against Bjergsen. I doubt they're that concerned. In fact, if I was White,
you just bait him into it and design your shit around playing against Zed, right? Get all those exhausts.
Yeah. It's like what's annoying. You could deal with Zed if you're good enough as a team. Like Xerath is kind of. I think I might ban Xerath against White or against TSM if I was White. Just get rid of Xerath because that champion's dumb. And then I probably ban Tristana.
I think the
I'd ban
best
Tristana.
I mean,
Why not?
I would assume in this series, based on the bans, that we're going to see a shit ton of Bjergsen and Orianna. That's like the champion I
Yeah.
notice he tends to default onto when he doesn't
Well,
get the Z or.
Most mid laners will default on it because it's a very safe.
But I
pick.
mean, it's a good pick for him as well. But
It's
as
a
a
good
result,
pick,
you
yeah.
can almost bank that he'll be playing it in at least a few games.
Yeah, I'd ban Rumble if I was white. I would ban Rumble, Tristana, and Xerath.
I mean, to
'Cause
be
that's
fair,
just
you are
annoying.
right, Monty. Like, to be fair, I will admit, since season 2, like, Orianna has always been in that, like, red box that's in the corner. And, like, in case of emergency, smash this and get Orianna. Like, well, we've got the Orianna at least. Like,
Of course,
everyone
just
plays
too much
that.
utility, too much damage. It just offers everything.
That's
Very
why I
difficult.
always say that to me, that's Faker's signature champion. I always think of it as Faker's Orianna, because the difference is he would always be able to get it because it's nearly always available, and then
He's his
he would,
most played
he would
champion all the
dominate
time.
with it and win the most games. You know, so the fact he was
He's
able to
played-
do it with the patented mid lane champion is why, to me, is so impressive.
Yeah, well, he's played it more than any other champion. So
okay.
yeah, anyway. We're kind of going too far into like possibly into the quarterfinal matchups right now. But
Okay.
the point of this, one thing that I do want to say about TSM that I find very unsettling is that okay, when they're good, you know, when they ran that siege composition, when they ran the kind of shield composition with the Rumble against StarHorn and or against they ran it against.
SK?
No, they had like the Ori shield. Oh, I'm trying to figure out which game that was. I'm trying to remember. Oh, they ran it against TPA
Okay.
with Tristana. I mean, they do know when they have a composition they're comfortable in playing, they play it out really nicely. And so but it's like they hit these weird bumps in the road where they like their first game against Royal, like they didn't seem to know what the hell was going on. It's like if they don't come into the game with a preconception about what's going to happen in that game, they are just like totally incapable of adapting. Like that game against SK was just a horror show by both teams, really. I mean, it was just an awful game of League of Legends. It was like so bad, it was kind of hilarious.
Yeah.
But it's like they didn't expect the Swain pick. And we were looking at that. We talked about the lane swap at the beginning a little bit on the broadcast when Crepo and I kind of went over that replay about how they didn't even like freeze the wave and they kind of got themselves in an awkward situation. But it's like SK picked Morgana, Vayne, Swain. And I think they just like, I think that Crepo's assumption that they thought Swain was a Maokai counter pick and that for some reason they wanted this, but trying to lane Morgana, Vayne against Janna, Kog'Maw is like a suicide mission. So it was pretty clear to me that they were going to lane swap and just put Swain in the lane swap. But TSM really didn't respect the possibility of the lane swap at all. Like they got caught up in their minds that it was going to be a 2v2 and a 1v1 because Swain was picked. And they thought it was like some like weird Maokai counter.
So you think it was like a mind game from SK?
Yeah, it was a mind game. But the thing about it is that when the lane swap occurred, you know, N-Rated piles the wave in top and freezes it. But Turtle and Lustboy like walk in behind the wave and don't even bother to try and freeze it. Like they don't even respect the possibility of a lane swap. And that's why like they had to dive the bottom turret where Swain was because it was like slow pushing in after that because they messed up their freeze where they didn't even try to freeze. Really, they didn't even try. And then they had that just disastrous like Morgana double kill because after N-Rated froze top, he just recalled and went right back down into the Swain lane. And then they had that really bad dive. But to me, it's just like TSM is when they know what they're doing, they can play it out really well. But they don't seem, unlike most, I wouldn't say most teams, unlike elite teams, unlike the very best teams in the world, they are not capable of adapting their strategy or figuring things out on the fly. And when they get confused, it just like everything just goes to shit really fast. Like they just like repeatedly dive Swain. Like I don't even know what they were doing in that game. Vayne was like getting further and further ahead. They didn't have anything to stop the split pushing Vayne, but they just kept diving Swain for no reason.
So I have
like, why are you doing this?
I referenced this actually. I think it might have been last week's show. That one of the positives of TSM that I'd noticed was that whenever they played a series, a best of 5 series, they would always start slow. They would always lose games, but they would gradually improve going on. And as I said, it was like you're saying here, they improved between the games. They figure out what went wrong between the games, and that's the tweak they would make that would make them better in the next game. Well, think about the logic of who they beat and lost to here. They get ultra stomped by Royal Club first game. Second game, they win, so they've made some adjustments. They've done something right. Now, what might seem like it's the counter to my argument is that they lost to SK in the second matchup. But technically, they'd never played SK at that point. They played SK with Gilius the first time. They hadn't played against Svenskeren. And so actually, I think that can actually be excluded from that pattern in general. TSM was stronger in the second half of the group stage than they were in the first half. Actually, I think the pattern still holds. So to me, that's probably the coaching staff is doing a good job there, or they do as a team, they're analyzing what's going wrong. But as you say, it's worrying in the sense that you get concerned. Like, for example, if they play against White, the first game is the one to me that will be the ultra mega stomp. Like, that's where the most danger to TSM lies. And then the fact that you don't really have time in that best of 5 to get all your shit together. And then you still might not be able to win even if you figure out what you're doing wrong, you know?
I think that the strategic versatility of White just like gives them almost no chance
and by the way,
anything at all.
Even though overall Bjergsen played well. Now, he didn't play uber godlike. I think people went a bit too far on that. He played well, though. He just played a very good, solid game overall in nearly all the games. The shot calling, again, for TSM was all over the place. This team did not...
That's what I'm saying.
If it got into a mid game that was contested, they didn't really know what to do. Still, that's still a weakness.
Yeah, and they didn't close out games that they should have won as fast as they could have, or as skillfully as they could have.
And by the way, Monty, you remember that famous line? I can't remember what your witty line was. Where you remember the game, wasn't it? It was Evil Geniuses against CLG, right? In the summer split, and you had a line that was along the lines of like they traded Baron for their entire base. Was that the game? Was it Dignitas?
Yeah.
I think it was Evil
No,
Geniuses.
it was. Yeah, I think it was EG.
So I have a similar line here. Unless I'm mistaken, I think what happened was TSM traded the entire game for a Nexus Tower or something. Like
that was honestly one of the most bizarre decisions that I've ever seen.
That was like, I made this joke on the Daily Breakdown show. That was like you came along and you were like, you're expecting, okay, this is someone's base. This is their fortress. They defend this to the death. They're going to want to know where you are. But you know what? The door's slightly ajar when you come along. You push it open. There's a red carpet laid out. You walk in at the table. There's a goblet filled with what looks like a delicious vintage Merlot. And there's some cheese. And you think, oh, fuck it. This how kind of them. I'll just sit down and take a drink. And then turns out the wine is poisoned. They're behind you with a knife that goes in your back. How could you have known? How could you ever have known?
Well, it's just like the gingerbread house, man. You just like, you know, the kids walk up to the gingerbread house. It's so sweet. They start taking bites out of the delicious gingerbread. They go inside and the witch puts them in the oven.
And by the way, one of the most fucking... I hope Candy Panda appreciated this. One of the most surreal things I've ever seen in my life was that video someone released of Royal Club watching the game in the back. Because obviously, if Royal Club was wanting SK to win. So when Royal Club see that Candy Panda is winning the game... You remember, by the way, Candy Panda is a huge fan of Uzi because Candy Panda loves to play Vayne. And I think Candy Panda wishes he was like a super hyper carry type dude. But he's not quite within that realm. So... I can't even imagine how surreal it must be for Candy Panda to watch Uzi like cheering him on as he like carries the end of the game. That must be like the shit right there. That one moment made it worth it for you, Candy, going to Worlds. That one moment.
It's funny because did you see Candy's tweet afterwards? He was like, I did it for Uzi.
It was good. I liked it. Also, here's the thing, okay? This segment, Monty, will inevitably reveal deposits of salt within the viewer base, but it has to be discussed for the purposes of intellectual honesty. When I look at all the SK games, I won't say that SK would have definitely gotten out. That was never what I initially said. But SK would have definitely been competitive for the second spot in this group if they'd had their full lineup for the whole time. Thoughts?
Absolutely. 100%.
Because think about it. Even the games they were losing, the first 3 games they played, they were in the Royal Club and Taipei Assassins games. They couldn't close them out and they couldn't win and they were playing with a massive handicap. But okay, I'm not going to say they're going to win both those games, but I figure they could have won the TPA game. That's very winnable. It's not unfair to say they'd win that.
They should have won the TPA game. They threw the TPA game, right? They were ahead. TPA had no way of engaging. Like they made a dumb Baron call and like that's what got it out of the game. If they had played smarter, they wouldn't have been in that situation. Now, TPA, of course, deserved to win that game. They caught them at the right time. They did the right thing. But, yeah, I do think that SK was in control of most of that game despite having a substitute player.
And like going back to TSM too, I do think TSM did have some really crisp games. Well, not really crisp, but like sort of crisp. They were like, instead of, you know, fresh lettuce straight from the garden that was put directly into the crisper drawer, they were like maybe like 4-day-old grocery store lettuce or something like that. It wasn't as good as other teams in this tournament, but they definitely had the right idea. Maybe it was a little like 5, 8, 10 minutes too late, but like their sieging was usually the right decision when they actually got there. Their shield comp was really good against TPA, and that's something that they're used to running. It's like when they're used to running something, they can usually perform not great, but pretty well. And then but that's the thing is like, it's like everything has to be so smooth. Like it has to be like a perfectly smooth road, and then they can just like zip along it as fast as possible. But if there's like that one pebble or that one little bump in the road, then, you know, the car just like flies off and does a bunch of somersaults and just explodes. They can't adapt very well on the fly.
So I brought this up in a previous episode, but one of the reasons I don't like Bjergsen shot calling is that aside from the fact he doesn't seem that good at it, at least now, I also feel like it in some sense limits his game. Like I feel like some of the times where he's hesitant personally is because he's too focused on the macro strategy, or he doesn't want to like tunnel on what he's doing now as an individual because he's trying to figure out what the right decision is. He's trying to get through it. Anyone who's a fan of Bjergsen would have told you, Monty, if he gets Zed, it's game over. They've won that game 100%. I'm actually not sure it's that certain anymore. Like, actually, he was good on Zed, but...
Well, they just focused his other lanes, and he never got bigs to the where he could split push, so
but I mean, this isn't like a Season 3, give Nukeduck or Bjergsen Zed, and that's game over, and they definitely will carry every game, and then they'll go to the other lanes, dominate all that. Like, that world, we're not really in that world anymore. It is a dangerous pick, but like you said, White could definitely leave it open and still win all the games.
Yeah. Well, they're a much better team. So
anyway, at the point I was making when I was saying about SK, so okay, SK could have beaten TPA, obviously, once, if not twice. They did beat TSM in one game. Okay, again, the other game would have been contested. I don't know who would win that if they had Svenskeren. But here's the key thing. I think the key factor that also makes me think SK could have won is that TPA... I think TPA were a little bit overrated, but they could have played spoiler even though they didn't here. TPA had some games they could have won over the bigger teams. So all you need is them to win one of those games, and then it actually doesn't matter if you went even with the others, because your record against TPA would be the decider if you came second, actually. That's how these 4-team group stages tend to work out. It's not always just your head-to-head. It's who beats the worst team, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, SK definitely proved that as well.
I've got a weird statement for you, Monty. On one hand, I feel like you overrated TPA. Like, I feel like Monty heard that thing, like, Korean coach, like, you know when people on Reddit do that thing where they take a phrase and then they keep breaking it down into, like, the most low level? You're like, TPA has a Korean coach, Korea. Like, and that's like, that was like your logic level. You were right, Monty. They did have, like, the first time, here's the thing with them. They were the opposite of TSM. The first time they played everyone, they looked really good, but they could never close a fucking game out. They were incapable of it. And then also their players got worse as the tournament went on.
They would have like all the tools. They would like buy all the wards, and then they would go to the Baron, and then they wouldn't know where to put the wards. Like, so it's like they had been trained like up to a certain point, but then like there was a point where that training like obviously broke down. It's like, okay, we know to buy the wards now. We know we should go to the Baron, but we don't know quite how we should bait the Baron with these wards. Like the instructions were there, but the technique was like slightly off, and that resulted in some pretty dumb games.
And I also have to say, as a trend, I just noticed that it's not just that the games got worse as the tournament went on. As the tournament went on, it seemed like their players were actually
they just
as good as in the first games.
No, I mean, it was impressive to see them early on too. I think they did really surprise people, but they did steadily play worse, I feel, as the games dragged on. I think they lost a lot of confidence in themselves over time. Unlike AHQ, that kind of stepped up the more games they had.
Though also, people shouldn't go too far. AHQ were in a group with EDG and Samsung White. Like, to me, TPA is still the better of the two teams. Like, if you put AHQ and the other way around, I think actually TPA would have overall been better.
Maybe. I don't know if TPA would have been able to beat
EDG.
Oh, but I think AHQ would have lost all these games. So I think it would have been similar in that respect.
Maybe.
Right. Who was the... That's all the teams, so let's talk about the quarterfinals matchups now. So we've done a bit of White and TSM. You must have something else on TSM versus White. Okay, I've got a question for you, Monty. When Pawn... I only do this to fuck you, but whatever. Pawn is well known for beating Faker. So what happens when he plays the Faker of NA? I'm going to reference that as many times in my life as I can.
Fuck you. I think he'll just... I don't think he'll do much. I think he'll just farm. Doesn't need to take risks or to make flashy plays against Bjergsen. I think that what we saw when what StarHorn did was just not even focus his lane, just have the mid laner just go ahead and farm on a very safe champion like Zilean, and then make plays on top and bot. And I think that's just a really good way to beat TSM, because if Bjergsen doesn't have any help, or, you know, if you play safe enough, and because Amazing just camps mid lane for the most part. So if you can avoid getting killed by Amazing and Bjergsen, and your jungler is wrecking top and bottom, then Bjergsen never gets big, and he's got 2 losing lanes. And when TSM have 2 losing lanes, they almost never win the game.
That's one of the concerns for me, actually, is the Bjergsen thing. Because here's what's weird. This will sound crazy, because people might think it's right initially when I say this logic. But on paper, if you're a Western fan, you look at this lineup, okay, and it reminds me of when Royal Club played against Fnatic in the semi-final last year. One of the things was, when you looked at the matchup, you, as a given, you thought to yourself, right, okay, well, at least I know Expeke is going to win against Whites, because Expeke had been having a phenomenal tournament. It was his meta. He had all the champions. You're thinking, right, well, I don't know who this Whites guy is. At least I know that lane's safe. And that obviously turned out to be the pivotal lane in that series, where Whites actually outlaned him, counterpicked him every time, and that was a key problem. Here's the problem here. Because Pawn in his team looks so average. Like, we made this point on the Top 20 show. The weird thing about Pawn is, the champions he's a specialist at, he isn't allowed to play in his team. He's not allowed to play fucking Yasuo and what's the other one?
Fizz.
He doesn't play these champions. They only played it here, sort of just style on people. He has to play shit where it's like, it's not his style. But it makes sense, because the rest of his team are the stars. That's who you're trying to set up. So here's the problem. You'd want to look at it, Monty, and be like, right, well, at least I know Bjergsen, if he goes really great in mid lane, can win this game for them and dominate Pawn. Actually, that's not a given at all. If anything, Pawn can probably just definitely not get solo killed and just survive, and that'll, to some degree, nullify Bjergsen, right?
Yeah, it's what Pawn normally does. He just sits there and doesn't get solo killed and farms up and just plays utility. Let me just look at his most played champions right now. So he's played a lot of Nidalee in the past. Orianna is his second most played. He's played a bunch of Yasuo. Ooh, he actually has a 90% win rate on Yasuo. He's 9-1. So... But Orianna Zilean is what he's been playing mostly recently, and a little bit of Jace on the side. So
let's keep going in terms of favors, okay? We're trying to get the positive matchups here for TSM. The next one I'll go to is Dyrus play against Looper. Now, this actually isn't as terrible. Oh, yeah, of course, Dyrus isn't some teleport god like Looper is known as. And the thing is, Looper's not going to lose lane in general, so... This is kind of a wash to me. Like, I think Dyrus can do fine here. I don't think just if they're one-on-one, I don't think there's any reason it has to be a massive disadvantage. But again, there's no advantage here. There's no positive that I can think of here in this matchup. What do you think, Monty?
Well, the positive for White is that Looper's a lot better of a teleport user than Dyrus, and he's going to be faster on the trigger, and he's going to be able to set up better teleports. So, and Looper, whatever, he can just play tanks. Doesn't really matter what he plays.
But here's the problem, Monty. Now it starts to get worrying.
Maybe he'll play top Kassadin. I don't know. We haven't seen top Kassadin yet, but it's going to happen at some point in this tournament.
Because we've just picked the 2 best TSM players, and they don't have a positive in their matchup, okay? This is where it starts to get depressing, Monty. Because now when I talk about the jungle, oh boy, this is going to be bad. I'm not saying this just because of who the players are, but think about the style of players. Like, actually, a key thing that Amazing style is that he's, like, super patient. He will like set up a pick where he's in a bush for ages, and he's there for so long that eventually the top lane is like, there's no way he can be in that bush still. Like, I'm just going to go into lane again. And that's when he gets his gank off, okay? If you just sit in a bush for 30 seconds in a game that Dandy is in, you're going to get fucking destroyed. Like, you have to be constantly, basically you have to play mind games against Dandy, because he's going to do that otherwise against you. So if you can allow him to know where you are on the map, like, That's almost the game lost right there, right? That's Dandy's shit. Like when he knows where you are on the map.
Yeah, and his counter ganking too. And the thing is, when you have a predictable style like Amazing, when Dandy knows you're just going to sit in mid lane all the time, you're going to get counter ganked. You're going to. Because Pawn will bait that, and Dandy will set it up. And the thing about him not playing Rengar is extremely good at counter ganking. So if they bait out ganks in mid, then Rengar's going to be there, and they're just going to get messed up. So, I mean, it's going to be really risky for TSM, I think, in the jungle game. Amazing is... I don't anticipate him doing very well.
Like, listen, fans, ignore the smile on my face as I say this, but this isn't just like I'm just reveling. I obviously am. What am I talking about? This is going to be the ultimate example of Thorin's criticisms of Amazing.
Yeah.
If you ever want to see him get exposed, that's what this series will be.
Amazing is very predictable.
Like, unfortunately, here's the thing. I can't think of an upside. Like I've even said in the past, when Amazing is on Lee Sin and Elise particularly, he can be very good. He can make plays. You can't do that against the Lee Sin god. Where's the upside to that? There isn't even an upside.
And then the other thing is, of course, the duo lane.
No, that's where it gets really depressing.
When Lustboy was in Korea, we would have ranked Lustboy like somewhere between probably like a 5th and 8th ranked support.
Let's just say, Monty, I've spent a sizable portion of my life watching Lustboy lane against Ozone bot lane, and I don't enjoy it, quite frankly. I found it rather disturbing to my temperament, traumatic in some senses. Like, that doesn't go well. And then when you add in that now he's playing with Wild Turtle instead of Emperor. Oh, and by the way, just to throw this out there, I think in Lustboy's interview, he tried to suggest that Wild Turtle is better than Emperor. Settle the fuck down, big fella. I know you're in America. You want to pump up your teammates. Settle the fuck down. Don't go crazy, Lustboy. Rein it in. You're almost on level of your Millennium prediction now, buddy. Like you're out of bounds. He's talking out of school. I want you to rein it in a bit. He is not better than Emperor. Let's not get crazy here. But how's that bot lane going to manage, Monty?
It's going to be disastrous. There's no other way to put it. I mean, you're looking at what is probably the best laning bot lane in the world. Like, they just lane better than anybody else.
In the game that Royal Club lost against TSM, do you remember how the first 10 minutes went for the bot lane? I think Turtle had something like fucking half his CS at 10 minutes, and he wasn't even able to get out of under his tower. He was being that pushed off everything. Like, this could be one of the most horrific series ever if you're a Wild Turtle fan.
Yeah, it could be really bad. I don't think that Impinmata played that dumb. Like, I wouldn't say dumb as Uzi, but Uzi, like, walks up on every CS. Like, he zones so aggressively, and Impinmata don't necessarily do that. But they do have a lot of kill pressure, especially with Dandy. So it could be really, really bad. Could be really bad. Really bad. I think this is... Yeah, I think the jungle and the duo lane are definitely the most uneven matchups here, and I don't even know how you deal with it, frankly. Do you lane swap? Well, then, if you don't ban Twitch, then Imp just gets a free lane and he styles on you with Twitch all day.
Monty, does TSM lane swap?
No.
No. Actually, that's a point we can maybe relate to this group. Don't you think after watching the group, apparently from an interview, Enrated said he tried to do this in the first game, I think against Royal Club. I think it was the first game. But they just fucked it up when they were setting it up and they couldn't lane swap. But no one lane swapped against Uzi I and Zero. I mean, listen, hindsight's great and all that, but that is fucking... have you even seen those guys playing? Like,
well, that's what I said.
To do is avoid their laning stage with your bot lane.
That's what surprised me so much about Group A and B. We talked about this at the beginning of the show. I don't know why there were so few lane swaps. It didn't really make sense. Didn't make sense that teams were so uncomfortable lane swapping, even in bad lanes. I think that the better teams just didn't care. But I think that the teams that kind of were at a disadvantage, both in terms of skill and in terms of composition, should have just lane swapped.
Especially because fucking Royal Club was playing Rise top lane. That's like an invitation. Please lane swap and fuck us up completely.
Well, they were playing Rumble, and Rumble's rad in a lane swap situation, so I can understand it in that situation when Sam was playing. You know, that's
some of the other games, though.
Made. Yeah.
So
Rise is definitely better in a lane swap than Rumble, though. But if I was TSM won this game, so they obviously, I think, had a good read on the situation, and they did win top lane really hard by not lane swapping. But if I was going in, I would probably try to avoid Uzi.
So this might sound like an obvious question, irrelevant, redundant, all that good stuff. Is there anything TSM can do to win this series, Monty?
No.
There isn't really, is there? Like, the problem is, okay, I'll put it like this. They can win this series. It can happen. That is a possibility. Within the universe we exist in, the atoms could be arranged with certain fluctuations so that TSM won this series. The problem is, it is such an insanely outside chance that it would require things we've never seen before happening, and then massive breakdowns in areas where there never is a breakdown. So as a result, I don't think as an analyst you can predict it like reasonably. It's just not fair to predict, because what basis would you have to base it on, you know?
I think we can safely say that if TSM won this series, it would be the single largest upset in League of Legends history.
Like, actually, think about it this way. The one fallback you always have usually as a TSM fan is if Bjergsen is on an aggressive champion and he goes crazy, that could win the game. This is like a classic scenario, okay, that sometimes happens in basketball, where teams, okay, the worst style of team to play against in basketball, if you're a really good scorer, like an individual player, is a team that scores a shit ton of points across their whole team. Because that means you can have a game where you could score 50 points, but they still outscore your whole team and they win the game anyway. That's the sort of scenario that could happen in this series. Even if Bjergsen plays the best he's ever played, they could still lose every game, and he still might not be able to impact the game even by getting super fed. Because how the other lane matchups and the other champions, they're in a bad scenario. So yeah, I don't think there's a possibility here. Would you go as far as to say they're not going to win a game? Because that's one of the things in League of Legends I'm always skeptical about saying that, because in a single game it can be fluctuating enough. I mean, I don't think they will win a game, but
I think it would be very impressive if they won a game. I think that 90% chance they will get 0-3'd.
I'll give a caveat. Okay, here's how they could win a game. If Ozone goes up 2-0, I wouldn't be surprised if game 3 they start fucking around and doing stupid things.
They do that.
That's when the fucking Vayne Thresh, like ultra kill bot lane comes out, where you might have a chance to do something, you know, like you also might get your head caved in by like hyper carry Vayne, but you might have a chance at least, you know.
Or the Katarina shows up again for no reason.
Or maybe Dandy just brings out his Jarvan again. I don't think we're going to see that.
To be fair to Dandy, he played that Jarvan ridiculously well with his like QE flash knockups. I mean,
but I don't think we're going to see
ridiculous.
that in the rest of the tournament, Monty. I don't believe that will be a pick. So the other matchup that we're aware of, Monty, is actually a bit of a bomber of a matchup, actually. So the two best seeds from China are going to meet in the quarterfinals of Worlds. Where have I seen this before? Like, oh, come on, man. I want to see teams play teams from other regions. I don't want to see them play the same fucking match I saw like 7 times this year. Like, what do you think of this matchup, Royal Club EDG?
I think Freak had some good points on the desk when we were looking up the matchup history, because they actually haven't played each other a lot, and Royal was 3-1 over EDG in the regular season, and then lost just 1-2 in the regional finals. So it's an interesting matchup. I think Royal, because of their early aggression, does match up pretty well against EDG. And since they've been playing better, maybe they're even the favorites going into this. I have a feeling, though, that EDG is going to get their shit together before that happens, though. They've got a couple weeks. So I think this is going to be a 4 or 5 game series. I haven't decided yet who I think is going to win. I'll make a prediction next week.
See, I knew you'd do this, Monty. I knew the second Royal Club did well, and as soon as that AHQ loss happened, I knew that you would start leaning towards Royal Club, and you'd pick on the form, and you thought like this team's going to win. I still think this might sound crazy. I'm actually quite sure EDG is going to win that best of 5, because actually EDG in best of 5s are phenomenal. Like actually, they're a team that is actually worse in the regular season and gets better going into playoffs. Whereas actually what's funny is OMG is the opposite of that. OMG always blasts the regular season, then they actually weaken in the playoffs. Secondly, if Name is shit in that series, okay, I will start crediting like, okay, maybe he's not as good as I thought because he has this weakness in international competition. But I just can't see based on I've watched so many of the LPL games. I can't see him being that bad. I just can't see how it will happen. To me, his level's definitely going to rise and be very good.
I agree.
And as a result, I think EDG is just going to get together and win. I think this is going to be like 3-1 EDG.
Yeah, that's probably. I think that's probably
it's
true.
a fun matchup, though. Like, this is the teams you want playing.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be a very interesting matchup. But like I said, if you look at their previous history, yeah, I mean, Royal
and
does appear.
Here's a little factor to throw in. EDG do lane swap against Royal Club. They don't just put Nami up against Uzi and say, have a good time, mate. See ya.
Yeah.
They lane swap to make sure their fucking AD carry gets to the late game with some minions as well.
Yeah. We'll see. We'll see. But I think you're probably right. I think I still the favorite for EDG. I'm going to think about it a little more, but I think it'll be a pretty close series. But
I mean, don't you think it's also a factor the time off? If this was
that's
were playing
that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying is that I think EDG can get their shit together in a couple weeks.
If they were playing the next day, then okay, the form might carry over. They might still have the same problems. But the difference is when you wait 2 weeks, that's like playing 2 separate tournaments. So if you have a bad tournament, it doesn't mean you're going to have a bad next one 2 weeks later, you know.
I think also that the fact that they were in Group A and B and that they have the most time between the group stages and the quarterfinals is really beneficial to EDG, who seem to be off their game and need a little pick-me-up. So,
also, I think just from the style of the Royal Club guys, they're not going to have some weird picks and some super innovative strategy. They know how they're going to play. They're going to get if they can get Rengar on Insect and they can get Caitlyn or Tristana onto Uzi, they're going to pick these things. I think you're going to see that. So that's actually the downside of this matchup. It's fun in the sense that they have history, but it has been played out a few times before. Like I'm not expecting any massive shocks in this one. But there's no doubt Royal Club can win this, which, by the way, that would be a surprise in itself, right? Royal Club finishes top 4 at Worlds.
It'd be pretty good consistency for that team, even though obviously Uzi is the only returning player. It's pretty good for the org.
So I have a question for you now, Monty. If we've talked about Name, we've talked about Imp, we've talked about Uzi, in line with people getting super hyped over 1 or 2 games, apparently, just from beating up the bot lanes of SK Gaming, Taipei Assassins, and TSM, that's enough to make you the best AD carry in the world. What do you think?
No.
No.
He's a very good player. He's probably a top 5 player, but I think that we'll see less of him as and more of his flaws as teams are better able to punish them as the tournament develops.
Especially if you think about the current climate of League of Legends, one of the reasons why maybe Uzi does go a bit too ham in his contesting in the bot lane is think about the game they lost to TSM. He was doing the perfect job of denying CS, and he had this massive lead. But a couple of ganks, the game turns around, and like 5 minutes later or something, it was like tied in CS. So that entire thing had been nullified. Now, when you play against EDG, first of all, they play against these beast AD carries. They know just try and get to the late game. So it's going to get to the late game. The problem is in the late game, that's where Name shines, and that's where Uzi, his flaws can be more apparent, because that's where he can misposition in a fight, or he's just not optimally positioned. This doesn't have to be a misposition or a great position every time. It can just be in the middle. That's where I think he'll be outshined in that sense, you know. And that is your biggest strength.
Right, and I think that Royal just doesn't have as strong of players around them as, like, EDG is just a more cohesive unit. They are not about the skirmishing. They play better as a group of 5, you know? So that's going to be like a really good match, though. I'm really excited for that one. Yeah, it sucks that China has to play China, but whatever.
Yeah, it's fair enough. At least there's 3 Chinese teams this time, so it's not as big a deal. That's enough. That's
right.
Enough.
Well, I don't think OMG is going to get out of groups, so that's just me.
Well, we'll soon see about that, Monty. My 5th is still there. So... You know what? Actually, with the way the next 2 groups that we're going to see now, Monty, for some reason, have the first 2 groups, how they've played out, at all changed any of your thoughts on these 2 groups?
Not really.
Like, I have to ask you this, Monty. people have probably heard me like beat this point into the ground on everything I do because I say it in Counter-Strike all the time. I'm sure I've said it in League of Legends. I think scrim results are the most fucking overrated, almost borderline irrelevant piece of information that pros, for some reason, believe like the gospel. Like you could tell TSM really believed, based on their scrims against Samsung, that they were going to be way better than they were. Like they themselves bought the hype.
Well, Samsung Blue is known for not performing very well in scrims in Korea, for example, but they always win. You know, it's like it doesn't matter really.
That reminds me, Monty, as a side factor, as if it already wasn't hard enough for TSM to win. Oh, your scrim partners were Samsung White. Good night. Like now you have to play them in the round of 8. So how were you getting so good, TSM? Well, we were scrimming Samsung to stay in top ship. Okay, you can't do that anymore. You're playing them. Shit. Oh, and another thing, you're playing Samsung White. Shit. Well, who do we practice against? Do we practice against? Yeah, in fact, who can you practice? I don't even know who the fuck they could practice against now. There's no one as good as those teams to practice against. Yeah, you're fucked. Sorry, TSM, you're fucked. Rest in peace. Look, you got to the round of 8. I mean, listen. It's not entirely fair that I joked and said that the asterisk is next to them. Like after they lost to SK, I said that placed the seal of the asterisk next to that up front. Like not really a round of 8 performance. That's not entirely true. It's sort of, but it's not. Here's the thing: it's not TSM's fault that happened. So it's not an asterisk in the sense that it's bullshit. It's just that we can't be certain they were a round of 8 level team.
I agree, but you know they won the first seed, so they could get the easier group potentially. They got.
By the way, that turned out to be fucking huge.
Yeah.
Imagine a world in which
I said it was going to be fucking huge, dude. It's huge for Europe and NA to get #1 seed.
Like the craziest one is, remember they could have lost both games, the semi-final and the final, so they could have come third, or in fact they could have come all 3 positions, first, second, or third, literally by 1 game each way. Here's the funniest thing: the worst for them would have actually been to come third. At second, if they'd have been where Cloud9 is, and the 2 teams they have to beat is White Shield and Alliance, that's a terrible matchup if you're TSM. Like how are you going to do what TSM needs to do? Lane well, so you get to a point where you have a lead in the mid to late game, and then do some okay shot calling and win the game. You're not going to do that against Shield and Alliance in 4 games. That would have been terrible, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, everything worked out ideally. TSM's into the round of 8. Congrats. It will be ending in the round of 8, so that's the end of that.
Well, it's probably going to end in the round of 8 for any Western team, realistically.
Yeah, we'll see. Yeah, it is actually. I don't know why I'm being said.
What are you talking about?
It is.
The 2 Chinese teams are facing each other, and that means all the other Western teams that could potentially get out of the group are going to be facing Koreans.
Unless, for some reason, White Shield wins and Blue loses and comes second, then it would be...
Okay. All right, buddy.
That's the only scenario. But if it's
more likely, I would say more likely. If any team's going to choke, it's probably going to be Shield. So I would say Blue wins the group, and Shield takes second, and then they face each other. Right? I suppose that's a possibility.
But that would require some like miracle.
I don't think it's a very likely possibility. But yes, there is an outside shot that Blue and Shield could theoretically face each other in the quarterfinals, and then fnatic would play like Alliance or Cloud9, or OMG would play Alliance or Cloud9.
Okay.
Or LMQ will come up huge.
Okay, we'll talk about some more topics in a minute. Let's just do a quick break now. Okay, we've returned from another commercial break. Just getting used to that. So I haven't got any funny impressions for you, anything. I didn't have time to think that up. So we'll just go into... By the way, I love Defisher as well. That's like that comes from a place of love. That like I've heard his voice so much. I love his voice. That's why I like to do those impressions. So in Group C, we have a team called Fnatic playing. And as someone may have noticed, if they've been tracking LoL esports recently, there have been a lot of articles which seem incredibly favorable towards Fnatic and certain players. So in the top 20, Reckless was very highly placed. Yellowstar was on the list. In the group stage preview, there was these 2 comments that I highlighted on my Twitter, where one said that Fnatic had the best bot lane in the group. So essentially implying, we'll just address that one first, Monty. They implied that Fnatic's bot lane is better than Samsung Blue's bot lane. What do you think?
What's your definition of like better in the like? First off, you
I
have
would
to
assume they mean
quantify
laning
that.
because that's the only way I can think of to make it fair that they could have a chance for it to be true. Because if it's the whole game, just these are the two, but I can't see how it could be true, you know.
No, Deft has a much better sense of where to be on the map, and so does Hart.
But
Than
even
either
in
of
laning, though,
those players.
it's not like it's Uzi Eye here. Like Reckless isn't
No,
that
it's
aggressive
not.
in lane either. They're just going to probably that's just going to be a farm lane.
Yeah, more than likely, that's true.
So that is a little bit not quite sure what you're doing there. But the difference is, Monty, that's within the realm of we could find a rationale for that. We found our way to something that you couldn't. Okay, if you were to define bot lane as only laning and as only like minions and total kills, maybe you can make the case. Now we step into the realms of fantasy. Now we're just hypothetical. We're in my realm now, Monty. We're in my world, okay? We're just imagining shit and we're letting flights of fantasy run. We're sort of like Albert Hoffman the first time he accidentally tried LSD and he was what an incredible world, the mind, the breadth of what you can imagine. But not all of it's real, Monty. Some of it is just the imagination. So on this topic, they then went on in the article to even say that actually Fnatic has, get ready for the word, potentially, I should have one of those things like you have on the analyst desk, like a potential TM thing, like potentially the best bot lane in the world. Thoughts? Fnatic, potentially best bot lane in the world.
I don't even know what the fuck that means, honestly. Like, what is the potential situation where all the Koreans and Chinese people like die in a mass extinction? Like, I suppose that potentially they are, whatever, but realistically, you can easily, who's a better bot lane? If we're looking at the course of the game, if we combine all of the things that make a good bot lane, right? There are various roles of support and AD carry in the laning phase and throughout the rest of the game. Okay, here we go. Imp, Mata, Deft, Hart, Uzi, Zero, Name, FZZF. Or some other Korean ones that are better. I mean, probably Captain Jack and Che.
Rookie, Hachani. It's debatable, I guess. I think you could debate it, though.
I wouldn't
I think
say
Rookie
that.
carries harder than Reckless does.
I
Actually,
don't
why
know.
am I saying Rookie?
They're
Isn't
like
it?
weird.
Arrow's the fucking...
Yeah, Arrow.
I got that mixed up. I meant Arrow.
And
Yeah.
Chani.
Okay.
Maybe, but I think that's less clear.
Okay. That's debatable then.
OQ and Kane from Sword are really good. Really good.
But here's my problem with that statement, Monty. If you remember the top 20 list, Nif and Tab's never gone on it okay. Yet that's the problem. It's not like Fnatic's bot lane shits on every European bot lane. Fnatic's bot lane against Alliance's bot lane actually isn't that big a disparity. It's actually fairly back and forward, that bot lane. So that's why I'm a bit skeptical about this idea that it's the best. Because the problem is, if you're saying the Fnatic bot lane is that good, then to be fair, you will probably have to elevate the Alliance bot lane. Saying, yeah, I don't know anyone who's talking about the Alliance bot lane right now. No one's bringing them up in these discussions. You know? So what's funny is it's like people can see objectively how good the Alliance bot lane is, but they can't see objectively how good the Fnatic bot lane is for some reason, even though it's the same scenario.
It's super weird. I don't know what's going on. I mean, we spent the episode talking about our top 20 lists the other day, and it's just like, it's really weird the way that Riot, like, this is why a company with a narrative agenda should not be releasing this kind of content, because it makes them do things like put Zhao Wei Zhao on there and like put Reckless in the top 10, even though there's no justification for it that's even remotely sensible. And then say things like Reckless and Yellowstar are potentially the best bot lane in the world. That's just like not true. Well, okay, like I said, it depends on your definition of the word potential. But if you're going to use words like that in an article, what the hell is the point of even making that statement?
By the way, Monty, I've had this same debate and problem come up with fans, where fans will often rally around the person who made the statement. If they put the caveat of potential in, they'll say, okay, well, it could happen. Here's the thing. I've made this case before. When you're an analyst, you have to ask what is likely to happen, what will happen based on the... Now, listen, it is absolutely possible that Samsung White will like... Okay, Like, Imp's dad might die of the day of the event, and he might be called by his mother an hour before he plays and told that his father has died. Then he has to play. Then Pawn breaks his hand. If all these things happen, definitely TSM could win. Here's the problem. There is no real evidence to base it off. And it's so unlikely that for the sake of being able to have a conversation, you have to list it as impossible. You have to say that won't happen. It's so unlikely. So as a result, the word potential actually has no value as a word if you only use it in scenarios where it's extremely unlikely. Potential should only be used where actually, like, okay, for me, this would be fair if you said they were potentially, if there was like a 30% chance they were the best, then maybe potential's a good word to use there. But if it's like a 5 or a 1% chance, you're almost just like an enemy of language when you use potential there.
That's what I'm saying, man.
You've gone too far. Like, what's the point in the word anymore?
No,
that's why everyone made fun of CLG.
Even, like, yeah, I don't even understand the point in saying that sentence. If there's like so little evidence to back it up.
It's like the CLG one, okay? I'll give you a good example, right? You remember when Alliance was failing in the first part of that spring split? If they'd have never got it together, right, that would have been a perfect example of where you'd said, wow, they had all that potential and they couldn't do anything with it. Because you looked at the parts they had and you looked at and apparently how they were in practice and some of the names they had, and you were like, this should be a very good team. The difference is where potential has been ruined is by CLG. Because CLG's version of potential was like Big Fat LP, a failing mid laner who was good 2 years ago, has the potential to be really good at jungle, a position he's never played, and in which he's so far never shown really good jungling skill. That is not potential. You're like abusing that word there. You've got to kick that habit. Get off that word.
Hey, man, I did what I could.
Okay. Right.
But yeah, I totally agree. I mean, that's just nonsense.
Along these lines, when I talk about people breaking their hands, I have a quandary for you, Monty, because this is where I'm a bit torn. You know, we called Lord Loco Doco, right? Because technically he won that Lord bet and we honored it and we called him Lord. Even though it's entirely fair that I reference that he did make the bet about a team that then gained an MLG and OGN champion into the lineup and then won because of that. With their lineup, actually, I'm pretty certain they wouldn't have won. So, okay, but whatever. We'll ignore that for now. Here's the problem, Monty. I'm pretty sure we made some Lord bets with people over SK and TSM. But SK lost their jungler for 3 games. What do? Do we just hash the bet out and give them the Lord status?
I think we have to. I forget what those bets were.
But it's bullshit, isn't it? There's an element of bullshit to it.
Sure, of course there is. But I don't think I don't know.
I don't mind doing it. Like, we'll do it anyway.
I don't know, whatever. I don't even know what the bets were anymore.
It's a bit bullshit, though. Like, for example, just because if you're going to go too far with that, it does eventually get to the stage where if we make the Lord bet, I mean, at the end of the day, the Lord bet is supposed to be that you're so sure, based on this evidence that you have now, that they're going to win, right? You can't be asked to predict things that you never... Like, for example, if someone does break their hand, the other person isn't really the Lord because they bet on some totally different evidence than the guy breaking his hand that they would win. Like, I'm not sure that entirely carries, but whatever. We'll have to honor the bet. Whatever. It's bullshit. It's bullshit.
I just enjoy watching how mad you get over this shit.
Just because I just don't like the fact that it's like a bit disingenuous, you know. Like if someone beats me for right reasons, like for example, if they actually did pick out a good reason that I hadn't thought of as to why, and they wouldn't, I'd have to be like, nah, I've got to give it up to you. You were right. Like that was the reason why. But if it is shit like fucking lightning striking, like come on. Oh, I'm sorry.
Hey, that's a chance, man.
No, I mean, in many ways, Monty, my failure as an analyst was not to psychologically profile Sven Skeren and his threats and his danger zone in terms of political correctness. If I'd have done that accurately, I might have been able to get a gauge on this, but I didn't.
All right, so. That's the bank what they're banking on, man. Dandy's gonna make a racist name, get a 3-game suspension.
Well, that is another way that they could win. Yeah, you're right.
Oh man.
Actually, what did you think overall of like in Group B? I actually heard a lot of people commenting how the games were all shit in these first two group stages. Because obviously Group A was like, that was boring as fuck. Even AHQ winning, it wasn't actually that hype to me. I mean, the end of the game was like, the rest of it was boring as fuck.
And
Group
even
B,
the games that were supposed to be good, i.e. White and EDG, were boring.
I mean, they were only good in the sense that you marvel at how a tiger utterly destroys the gazelle that it picks off. That's the weak one with a hobbled leg. You're not really enjoying a fair fight at that point. You're just looking, wow, the mastery and the way he tears the flesh apart and the claws are in the strength. You know,
it's the majesty of the apex predator. You know,
that's why, Monty. You know, when people say like, oh, I want the regions to be closer and I don't want there to be this disparity. I always say no, because like, you know, when you're watching those documentaries, if you're a little kid, sometimes naively you think that's unfair. Why doesn't the camera crew stop that? No, your job is to document how incredible this violence and tyranny is. Like, you're supposed to sit back and observe. So that's what I want to see. I want to see games like that where people utterly dominate someone who's a very good team as well. That's amazing to see. Okay, let me ask you this then. I just want to keep an update, Monty. You saw what happened to EDG. EDG underwhelmed you a little bit. AHQ maybe overperformed what you'd expect from them. Taipei Assassins underperformed a little bit from what you expected. TSM had some good moments, some shaky moments. You've seen there were some differences maybe from where we would have been before. I just want to keep an update on you. I know nothing's happened yet, but is your faith in Najin's Shield to be really good and to be this top team that you saw at the qualifiers, is it still intact? There's no question marks in your mind?
No, there are question marks. So that's why I said earlier that if any team's going to throw or like underperform, I think it's going to be that one out of the Korean teams. Yeah, I think there are a lot of question marks. We've discussed them. They had a very good weekend. I have never seen Watch or Zephyr play that well before. I have no idea if that's sustainable. No clue.
Because actually, one of the teams that I'm actually coming round a bit on is Cloud9. Like, I still think Alliance...
I think they're good. I don't think Alliance is going to get out.
But I think that actually Cloud9 might have benefited more than any other Western team from the boot camp. That's my sense.
That's what I said. That's what I said. And not only Cloud9 as a team, but if any player would have benefited most, it's High from that boot camp.
That's the problem, though. I want to bring this up, actually. I didn't mention this enough on the preview show we did in the prediction show. But actually, the one thing I'm really worried about for Cloud9 and why I don't think they're going to win is that usually when High does his best is when he can play those like broken champions. Like he can play the Assassins, etc. And he can play in NA, he doesn't play super strong dominating mids. Internationally, the reason why Cloud9 has lost games is they go up against Alex Ich on a patented signature champion Kha'Zix. They go up against Expeke on Kassadin. When you play these champions, or Fizz, that's when High would get utterly crushed and Cloud9 would look their worst. In this group, I'm really worried how High will match up against Goong and Froggen. I think that's like a potentially very worrying matchup. Like against Goong will pick Zed and will pick stuff like that, and he can potentially dominate High. And then Froggen isn't going to dominate High, but he is just going to out-farm him, and then Froggen knows how to play against assassin mid laners. So again, I'm just a bit concerned. I wonder where your confidence in him comes from if this is a weak spot. Is that an issue?
I think High, it will be an issue, but I think that High will get better, and I think that C9 is the most strategically team in the West, and they'll be able to overcome some of those limitations. My counter question to you is what happens when Wicked comes up against Balls and Save? I see it very similarly.
Touche, sir.
I see it very similarly. So when I balance these things in mind, and then I say, hey, C9 has better shot calling, I'm like, I think C9's going to win. That's why.
Oh, and by the way, I'll just throw this in as a small aside. Froggen actually has a very underrated assassin game because he very rarely uses them. But actually, he can play them. Like, I remember a game that always sticks in my mind was when EG played against... I think it was when they played Fnatic in the summer playoffs of last year. They actually, the second game, which they lost, their whole team got shit on, right? They lost the game. It wasn't even close. Froggen went something like 13-2-5 on Fizz or something versus Expeke.
His Fizz is good. I'm not sure exactly how good his Zed is.
Zed is okay. It's not super. It's okay. It's not bad, put it that way. It's just that obviously those don't fit the style. It doesn't fit Froggen's philosophies. He's not going to play him in general. I think he picks Fizz for the comp, actually. I think that's the only way he picks it. I think by default, he wants just the farm. That's what you're always going to see. Okay, I think we've pretty much covered everything here. We don't even have any final messages. Well, we'll just start doing this regularly. So let me think. Like, subscribe to the YouTube channel because that's where the VODs comes. It's easier to just see that when it appears in your subscription feed. That makes it easy.
You do get some Travis spam in there. Sorry about that.
Yeah, he does try ever so hard. So, kind of a lot. Some of them are interesting as well. There's not that many interviews for Worlds at the moment. Oh yeah, anyway. Yeah, just subscribe to stuff and do other stuff that involves social media and building brands and all that good stuff. And then that's the end of the show. Goodbye.